Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Emily opened her eyes. She felt the dirt under her fingernails and the cold, damp earth. The sensations came into her mind, not all at once, but one at a time, as if there were a narrow door that only one at a time could slip through. Emily grimaced in pain as a bright light shone in her face. It came and went. There was a terrible headache. That was the second thing she felt. Then the girl realized that she was terribly cold, so much so that she could barely feel her own body. The thought shook her so much that Emily tried to get up. She looked around, birds cawing, dirt, cold, earth and grass with huge crosses everywhere. Realizing that she was in a cemetery, she began to breathe frequently. Panic set in. For a while, Emily couldn't even remember her own name. Then she realized who she was, but she didn't know where or why. She looked around and realized she was at the grave of her late husband. He had died only 2 years ago, but the memory of it hurt her every time. He had an ordinary grave, a black fence, a monument with a photograph, simple gray, no frills. Behind the monument was a wooden cross. Emily sighed. At least something made sense. Suddenly her gaze fell on the knoll of earth next to Michael's grave. He hadn't been here before. Who was buried so close to her husband? She looked closer and saw herself in the picture. It was impossible to make out the image in detail in the dark, but she remembered this picture of herself well. It was on her profile on all of her social media accounts. Lowering her gaze, Emily saw her name. Emily Johnson. With fear, the girl began to gulp air with her mouth. At that moment, she heard some noise very close by. When she saw 2 short silhouettes right behind her, she flinched and started to crawl back. Her short black hair was disheveled. She was wearing a black dress, no shoes, just black socks on her feet stained with dirt. "Don't be afraid of me," the boy behind her with the flashlight said quietly and calmly. He was the one shining the light into her eyes. A large dog sat next to him. "Who are you? Why am I here?" Emily asked fearfully. Her voice was weak and trembling. Nausea began to set in, and a severe pain appeared in her head. Panic was building. "I don't know, buddy, and I came here. My friend Grandpa Frank used to work here in the cemetery. He used to let me take all sorts of goodies from the graves. People leave them. And he said they'd put candy for people like me. I'd eat them, and some dead relative of theirs would smile in heaven, just like that." His words didn't make it any clearer. Emily looked apprehensively at the huge dog. It was acting friendly, wagging its tail and looking at the boy. He looked to be about 12 years old, blonde, a little overweight, with slanted blue eyes and rosy cheeks. He wore a yellow jacket and a black hat. The jacket was a little small for him. "I don't understand," Emily said. "I told you Uncle Frank let me take candy, but that's from the graves. And today I came in and they told me he was gone, that he was sick and couldn't work anymore. He's been replaced by his replacement. He's angry and drinks. He wanted to send me away, but I tricked him, pretended to leave, and came back. Grandpa Frank showed me a long time ago where there's a crawl space on the north side. Me and my buddy went in and started collecting candy, and he heard you. I didn't realize it at first, and he started digging your grave. I couldn't pull him away. He's digging at me like a real builder, what he's talking about, and I started to help him. It turned out you were buried shallow. The coffin was open and right on the surface. Grandpa Frank told me all the dead people are buried 2 meters deep. It was right next to here when a friend dug up a little bit of your grave. I heard you standing there too. Realized you were alive and opened the coffin lid. It wasn't boarded up. How should it be? Emily was horrified. Who buried her? Why? It was hardly an accident. If the coffin hadn't even been pinned up properly and buried deep. How are you not afraid to walk around here alone and dig up groupies? She asked. I'm used to the cemetery by now. Grandpa Frank used to say you shouldn't be afraid of the dead. You should be afraid of the living. But I haven't seen the living dead yet. Of course, yeah. Emily rose to her feet. Her whole body shook with cold. When I opened the coffin, you started climbing out right away. That's when I got a little scared. It was creepy. And then you lay there for a long time, like an hour. Come with me. I live nearby. I'll warm you up with tea. Just be quiet. My stepfather won't let me bring anyone. Emily nodded. She had nowhere else to go. She followed the boy, her friend running beside her, wagging his tail happily. Her rescuer's name was Bobby. His mom had died 7 years ago. He didn't even remember her. He was already living with his stepdad. He was a very bossy man. He'd fix anything, help anyone, but he drank a lot. Sent the kid out to pick up alcohol from graves. That's how Bobby became friends with the caretaker. Grandpa Frank taught the kid to be sneaky, saying they don't let him in the cemetery with alcohol now. They only let you keep candy. That's what the boy did to keep his stepfather from drinking. But of course, it didn't help much. They lived badly, poorly. Since he was little, Bobby was able to wash and iron and cook for himself, and also fed his stepfather from childhood. The boy had no childhood. Emily learned all this in the short time it took them to walk to his private little house. The cemetery was far outside of town. She'd been there often since her husband's death, but after a year she'd been less frequent. She needed to let him go and learn to move on. Emily promised herself to go there no more than 3 times a year, on Michael's birthday, the date of his death, and her wedding anniversary. For the past year, she dutifully kept her promise, and she wasn't supposed to be here until March of the following year, but somehow she'd managed to die on November 8th. How that had come about was a mystery. Her memory gave out information about the last days of her life selectively, in fragments. She couldn't remember the last events, but she didn't want to go back to the city to her apartment yet. There was little chance that she had been mistaken for dead, so she thought. Then she would be given a proper burial. Emily sat in the outhouse where Bobby had brought her, drinking hot tea. The boy wrapped himself in a blanket and sat beside her. A friend she often wiped his paws on before letting him indoors. This child was overly responsible for his years. I saw in a movie that a certain uncle was killed, and to avoid confessing to the crime, they buried him. Maybe that's what happened to you too, Bobby suggested. He was sitting close by. There was a dim light bulb on in the outhouse, and it was warm, but not warm enough to take off his jacket. On the wall hung photographs and Bobby's childhood drawings. In the corner was the usual garland of colorful bulbs. No, I'm buried next to my husband. He died 2 years ago. So whoever buried me, knew where my husband was buried, Emily thought. Michael sighed heavily. The boy settled on the mat on the floor. Won't your stepfather come in here? Emily asked. No, he's drunk again. You don't have to wait for him tonight. He'll wake up for lunch, sore, yelling at me, just like he always does. The neighbors have already called social services. I lived in an orphanage for 6 months, but he made a deal with someone. He took me back. He needs the child benefits that pay for me, and when he drinks, he says I look like my mom and he loves me. Except he doesn't care about me. He did when I was little, but not well. I was often sick. Neighbors nursed me back to health. Grandma Tisha lived across the wall from us. She's dead now. But she used to consider me her grandson. Helped my father raise me. She told me a little bit about my mom. When my grandmother died, I was 9. And then I became an adult and independent. I can be responsible for myself now. I still have a little bit left. I want to grow up soon, Bobby said. Emily smiled. She wanted to say, don't be in a hurry to grow up. Childhood is wonderful, but adulthood is full of challenges and worries, but that wasn't the case with Bobby. He had already grown up, but he hadn't grown up yet. He had had a difficult childhood, and adulthood was bound to make up for it. It should give him a loving, caring wife, children, friends, and he should never have to fight against the world alone, picking candy from graves and listening to his drunken stepfather. Emily sighed, looking at the boy. Time will fly by quickly. You'll see, she told him, and smiled. They talked for about an hour. Bobby was an extremely talkative young man and very bright. As she talked to him, her memory began to come back to her. She looked at the chubby cheeks of the boy with the beautiful blue eyes, and scraps of the last day flashed before her mind's eye. She remembered Jessica and the fact that she had tried to help her. Emily and Jessica had been best friends since college. They had bonded and quickly found common ground, being two against all odds, trusted each other unconditionally. When Emily met Michael, Jessica was jealous, but found it in herself to be happy for her friend, as she usually was. Their meetings became infrequent. They were replaced by the daily routine of married life. Emily was happy. She was glowing. The only sad part was that she and Michael never got to have children. When he died, Emily turned gray with grief, trying to take her own life. Jessica got there just in time, supported her friend the whole time, and they became close again. 2 days ago, Jessica had to drop her off at a fortune teller she knew for the second time. It's been a year. You still haven't recovered, Jessica was saying. Is that all normal? No, not normal, her friend argued. You need to say goodbye to your husband and move on with your life. This woman can talk to the dead. It's not like a cheap TV show. She really connects with them, sometimes giving people details that only their deceased loved ones could know about. Charges a lot for her services, but only if she manages to contact the person. She says not everything is in the public domain. Some people are allowed to talk to her, and others are forbidden. You know, it's awfully interesting. I was in contact with her myself when my grandfather died. She calmed me down and told me that he said hello and asked me not to get into his gear, to wipe the fishing rods clean of dust and rather fish like he did. She said he is with his grandmother now, and they are arguing again. Said his whole family is there, and he is happy to see me and know there is no death and no eternal separation. I looked at the world differently after that. Oh, nonsense, Emily replied dejectedly. But you're just torturing yourself with guilt. You can't do that. So you had a fight. Who doesn't? How can you beat yourself up like that? The day before Michael died, Emily was jealous of him. She'd long thought he was hiding something. Dark, she became suspicious. She found an outgoing text message on his phone to an unknown number. You too, of course, she thought some woman had texted Michael saying she loved him, and he erased her message and so replied, only he didn't have time to delete his own reply. She saw it. Michael claimed that the number belonged to his coworker, his boss, and congratulated him on the fact that the bonus would be at the end of the month. And he wrote you too to congratulate her, because she would be getting a bonus for overtime. Emily wouldn't make a big deal out of nothing, but this was not the first time she felt he was cheating on her. Every time there was some excuse, and she couldn't prove anything. She thought she was going crazy with jealousy, blamed herself. But that night she couldn't help herself. She tried to push Michael. He got angry, yelled at her, and left. They had a motorboat. They lived near the river. The boat was later found wrecked, and he was reported missing. But they said, dead don't get your hopes up. Emily stopped living when Michael was gone. She stopped believing in God and the devil. She lived out of inertia just because she had to live. She came from a wealthy family. She didn't need money. She hired a psychologist and worked with him, but not for long. He kept making her cry, reminiscing, hurting her, and she just stopped going to his sessions. 2 days ago, Jessica picked Emily up, and after work, they got in her car. They drove out of town. The same fortune teller was going to tell them something important about her husband. The first session Jessica had dragged her friend hadn't gone very smoothly. It was over a week ago. The elderly grandmother with the piercing brown eyes said that Michael was angry. He hadn't forgiven Emily and was asking her to explain herself. Emily didn't know how to respond. He said so. Not me, the fortune teller excused herself. Jessica paid for the session. It had been her idea. Emily refused to go. He was harsh on me too. That day, Michael could just calm down, explain. If that text wasn't for a mistress, then why did he refuse to call that number in front of me? I know his coworker. I would have recognized her voice. I've had my suspicions for a long time, and with his death, they haven't gone away. It's only gotten worse. We had a very bad breakup. Emily started crying. Michael said, "You had no right to be jealous." Emily sensed something was wrong. Michael was always reconciling after a fight. She was sure that if he hadn't died in the motorboat accident, they would have reconciled and forgotten all about it. She even considered not to forgive him at first. The quarrel was not good, left a residue, and suspicions had long tormented her. She wanted clarity. She wanted to know the truth, to believe, but she couldn't. The last thing she remembered. Jessica talked her into going to that fortune teller again. She didn't want to because she'd left her in tears last time. "We should go. She won't take any money. She says Michael didn't tell her everything, that he's keeping her awake and making her contact you. Let's go. It's free. What have you got to lose? If you don't believe me, don't believe me. Let's just hear her out and go. And put it behind us. And maybe you'll feel better after what she said." Emily agreed. She got into the car with her friend. What happened next was hazy. Jessica gave Emily some salted peanuts. Half an hour later, she was thirsty. "I have a thermos of tea lying in the back seat." "Yeah, sure," Jessica tossed over her shoulder. She was focused on the road. Emily decided to take a sip from the thermos. One, another, a third. "It tastes weird." "What is it?" she asked. "Kazakhstani tea. Very good, healthy, some kind of herbs." That's all I could remember. After that tea, there was a complete memory lapse. It was as if she hadn't even realized how she'd blacked out. One thing became clear. Jessica couldn't have had anything to do with her fake funeral. "What's on your mind all of a sudden?" Bobby asked. The boy had been staring at her in silence for several minutes now. Emily shook her hair. The black dye was visibly disheveled. It was creepy for her to be in a black funeral dress, but needing to figure out what had happened. I remembered everything she said slowly. Remembered what? What? Emily told the boy the events of the last few days. She spoke simply so as not to offend him with her silence. After all, he was the one who had dug her out with his dog and brought her in warmly and gave her tea. Emily was still coming around. The drowsiness and weakness in her body had only gotten worse. "You just don't go back there. What if that Jessica wanted to kill you?" "Yeah, she miscalculated. Maybe she planted arsenic." Emily shuddered. She felt sick, like she'd been poisoned. Could it be true? But the thought of her best friend wishing her harm seemed unbearable to Emily. Her thin fingers encompassed the mug of tea. My head hurt. I didn't even know if I'd have to go back anyway. I wasn't dead. And it's not clear what's left in the cemetery. I'll pick it up tomorrow, and no one will notice. Are you moving it here? I'll go inside. He might wake up. He'll fight again. The last time I was outside, the social services came to see him. He gave me such a beating. I said I'd be home before dark. I hope he's still asleep. Bobby went inside, saying he'd be home in the morning. He left the dog on the doorstep. The dog had been taught commands and obeyed his little master without question, and Bobby never left his friend hungry. Even at the worst times, he found a treat for him in the trash cans, and for himself too. During the night, the memories that her psyche must have separated from her mind for a while came flooding back. If she had just slept in unconsciousness until her release, it wouldn't have been so bad yet. But Emily began to remember waking up in the coffin. She was nauseous. The lack of oxygen was pressing in her head. A slight fear gripped her entire being. All night long, those memories made her shudder with terror. There was nothing more terrifying than a death like this. Emily's parents had died years ago. She had been an orphan, and Jessica had been the nearest and dearest person to her for a long time. Could she have done this to her? Or was it an accident? But then why did they bury her so ridiculously, superficially? There were too many oddities in all this. It couldn't have been an accident. In the morning, she heard her stepfather yelling at Bobby she wanted to stand up for him, but she cried most of the night. And she felt terrible when the yelling stopped. Bobby came into the outhouse with his dog. "I brought you some waffles. Do you want some?" he asked. Emily shook her head. She would have to go to the hospital, get checked out, find out, at the very least, what had caused her death, and why in heaven there had been a cancellation. "Thank you. I'll be coming back. I have my own apartment in the city after all. I have somewhere to go." "What if someone lives there now, one of the people who wanted to kill you?" "Let me go and find out. I'll ask the neighbors. I'll tell them you helped me before, and no one will suspect a thing. Will you at least know how you died and who buried you?" Emily shrugged. She explained to Bobby how to find her apartment. "Only I don't have the money to even get you a ride." "Yeah, well, they put you in the coffin without a wallet. But don't worry. I'm harebrained," he smiled. "What if you get caught?" Bobby squinted slyly. "I have a conductor I know who doesn't charge me. Always gives me a treat, too. I was walking my dog once, and a dog jumped him. And my dog protected him, chased the dog away. We've been friends ever since. He showed me to everyone on the route. So I get a free ride into town, and from there, too." "Wow," Emily marveled. "Wait a minute, you don't go. If anyone comes," Hyde said Bobby. "Okay," Emily nodded. She was feeling sleepy. Bobby was saying basically the right things, reasoning like an adult. She wanted to trust someone right now. She slept in the outhouse for 2 hours before she jumped up at the rumbling. "Who the hell are you?" A huge, bearded man loomed over her. Emily realized it was Bobby's stepfather. "Hello, my name is Emily." She threw back the blanket and staggered to her feet. The man saw her face in the light and started to stagger back. "And that's you." You Emily didn't understand. His face didn't look familiar to her. "I'm sorry, Bobby let me hang around. I'll be leaving soon. It's just that I'm in trouble. You can't be alive." Emily thought the man had white fever. He reeked of alcohol. "I'm going to leave right now. Let me go." The boy's stepfather stood in the doorway, his whole demeanor making it clear he wouldn't let go. His gaze was crazed, fear and something else in it, something evil. Emily saw a stick on the floor and grabbed it. She swung it at the man, but he didn't bat an eyebrow. "Let go or I'll hit you. I want to leave. I didn't take anything from you. I was just cold. Let me go." I'll scream. She began to choke with panic. The man took a step towards her. Emily tried to hit him, but he snatched the stick, threw it away, and hugged the girl. She thought he was going to molest her, but he only cried. "What's the matter with you?" "Let me go." "Emily, honey, is that you? Tell me it's you. I've been so sick without you." Emily raised her face to him and looked into his eyes. "I don't know you." "And you haven't lost your memory?" he asked, looking at her hopefully. He still had his arm around her. "No, you have me confused with someone else." Now, wait, he stepped out and locked her inside. Emily decided she had to get out, but the door to the outhouse was locked very firmly and the window had bars. She couldn't get out. Soon the man came back. "You're sorry, okay? Don't be afraid of me, I'm not crazy. Here, look at this." He held out a picture to her. Emily recognized herself in it. Except she'd never had that haircut, never had those clothes, and she'd never been to the place where the photo had been taken. "Who's that?" "That's you, isn't it? Look at it. It's not like I'm crazy." Emily stared at the picture for a long time. "Yeah, it's really weird. She looks a lot alike." "She doesn't look like her. She's a copy." The mole on her cheek. "Look. Is there such a coincidence? You have a voice like hers, too." I loved her. Emily was Bobby's mother. She's dead. A long time ago. This is the only picture I have of her. I didn't give it to Bobby so he wouldn't play bury it as a memory. "My name's John, by the way." "You're Emily." My head hurt like hell. Still nauseous, but intermittently thirsty. She told John about who she was, where she was born and raised. She was 17 when her parents died. Her uncle had looked after her for 6 months until she came of age, then left for Poland, where he was from. The rich heiress was left all alone, not knowing what to do with her parents' inheritance. She decided to study, and she went where she could enter herself and did not tell anyone that she had $1 million in her accounts. Even Jessica didn't know for a while, and when she found out, she said that she respected her decision to dispose of her parents' fortune wisely, not rashly. She'd never been jealous, never asked for a loan. They were friends, ignoring the fact that Emily could afford anything. And Jessica had a hard time getting everything, she said, and how she ended up in the cemetery. John only remarked that her friend was probably in on it, and Bobby could really help. He's very outgoing and can get information from even a scout. John, on the other hand, told her about Amy. "When I met her, she already had Bobby. I fell in love, got coded and didn't drink until the day she died. You know, if you're Amy's sister, I'd like you to take Bobby. He's your nephew after all." And out Emily raised her eyebrows. Sister, nephew. She suddenly realized that she wasn't just talking about a girl who looked like her. For some reason, that thought didn't immediately occur to her, but really because the birthmark was in the same place. "So maybe a sister then. So Bobby's maybe related to me." "Yeah, you're right. We need to figure this out. If that's the case, I'll take him, but only on the condition that you hang in there and live a normal life," Emily mouthed. John invited Emily into the house. She stepped inside. It was cleaned up. Only the table was left with traces of last night's libations. "You must be sick, huh? You've been poisoned, you pale thing. You're like a greaseball. You should go to the hospital for a checkup once in a while. Do you vomit all the time? I'll pour you some brine and you'll be fine." The bearded man opened the refrigerator. Inside was a lonely pot, half a loaf of bread. I could see why the boy was going to the graves. "Let me make some soup. Do you know how sure I can do anything?" There was a chicken leg in the freezer. The only thing missing was an onion, but the soup was good without it. Emily put in more carrots. When Bobby returned, there was a hot first course waiting for him. He was surprised that Emily got along with his stepfather. He hadn't told him about the fact that the guest might be his mother's sister. The boy had only seen the picture a couple times, so he didn't catch the resemblance himself. "I brought you a newspaper." "Take it, read it. It's on page 5. I couldn't find out anything else. Evil people live in your rich neighborhood. They wouldn't even let me in the front door. But the neighbor said a friend of mine lives in my apartment. I signed it over to her. It's an inheritance." I opened the paper. There was an obituary with my picture on it. The cause of death was a heart attack, and at 30 years old. That's highly questionable. I had a lot of things to figure out. I've probably never had so much uncertainty in my life, and Emily felt alive in the soup. Bobby dozed off, content, satisfied. She had sworn to herself when she left their house that she would come back for the boy, even if he was nothing to her. But she needed to figure out what had happened. Emily made her way to the city, walked to her apartment. John gave her Iris's old jacket that had been hanging in their closet for years. She couldn't bear to throw it away. Emily felt so strong in that jacket, like her sister was holding her hand. Standing at the door of Emily's apartment, I threw off my jacket. She rang the doorbell. When Jessica opened it for her, appearing on the doorstep in her robe and her favorite doggy slippers, not standing in front of her in a black funeral dress and staring menacingly into her eyes, Jessica pressed her hand to her lips. "Oh my God, it's you, you're that question again." I've heard that somewhere before. Emily's mind raced.
You poisoned me? And took my money for yourself? What kind of Emily didn't have time to finish the swear word that was begging to come out because Jessica started crying? I didn't do anything. I mean, I did, but I was hypnotized. Remember that fortune teller? She turned out to be a con artist. I didn't realize what I was doing. She compelled me. Compelled you to sign over everything I own to herself, forge signatures.
Emily asked. Jessica sounded sincere. I've been trying all day today to remember what was in that thermos. She was the one who gave it to me. I didn't want to. I realize now what I've done, and it makes me feel so nasty. Emily, honey, I'm sorry. I was hypnotized. Do you have to believe me? Emily walked into her apartment. Jessica cried as she told how the fortune teller looked her in the eye, how she taught her what to do. She said that after Emily passed out, Jessica had taken her to the cemetery and asked to bury her. The caretaker was greedy for money. He reeked of alcohol. Jessica gave him a good sum of money, and he said it would be done in the best way. He drove himself to the funeral parlor to pick up the coffin. She was afraid to stay there, so she just left her friend without even waiting for the funeral. She was still alive when they put her in the coffin, but apparently she was too lazy to dig deep, especially since the money was weighing on her pocket. I was very thirsty. They buried her in the spot Jessica had indicated. Then she put an ad in the local paper, just to clear her conscience. And that was it. Body buried. Paperwork's forged. What I don't understand is why the fortune teller made you sign it over to yourself. What's in it for her? She had to come to me to give me half of the fortune. That's what she said. I waited for her. She made me believe that I owed her, that it had to be this way, you know? I'm terrified myself. Her hypnosis is getting weaker now. I guess it's because I saw you. I'm so glad you're alive. Jessica suddenly grabbed her jacket from the coat rack and tried to walk to the door. At that moment, the police officers entered. Going far, Lady Emily stopped by the station with her story and told the story to the investigator. He was extremely surprised, sympathized with her, and told her to go home, hide from the criminal, and wait for the operatives. Jessica was arrested, so it was the fortune teller. But at the interrogation, it quickly became clear that the fortune teller first heard about all this. However, she told another funny story. Jessica had paid her to make Emily feel guilty. And I knew right away that the man was alive, she said. Jessica found another way out. Blamed it on Michael. Turns out Emily's ex-husband wasn't dead. The boat accident was faked. He'd been living in the city and dating Jessica the whole time. He had huge debts, which is why he decided to fake his suicide. He and Jessica had been having an affair for a long time. She was terribly jealous of her friend and decided to steal away the man she loved. Jessica wondered why some people get everything and others nothing. So she decided to even the score somehow. She helped Michael fake a suicide, and his debts turned out to be Emily's problem. She was surprised. She didn't know anything about the debts, but she paid them. She wanted to leave only good things in her loved one's memory. You pulled me out of the noose, Emily said bitterly. I was wrong to show weakness. I regretted it so much later. Michael came back to life quietly and inherited everything. But you were alive and whining all the time about how much he loved you and how you loved him. And the truth was, he didn't love you. Michael was always mine. You didn't get everything. Her best friend's words horrified Emily. How jealous she must have been of her all this time, to the point of poisoning her and burying her alive. But the worst part was that Michael was an accomplice. He helped carry Emily's body out when she had already taken the poison. When she found out, she couldn't help but cry. It was painful, cold, lonely. There was no one she could trust. The police assured her that Jessica and Michael would get real jail time for what they'd done. Emily hired a good lawyer. She was scared. She wanted these people to stay where they couldn't hurt her for a long time. The newspapers were full of headlines. Risen heiress punishes her killers. Emily agreed to be interviewed by one publication. The others hyped their versions. It was funny to read, but all her thoughts now were not about what had happened, but about what she had learned. To check the twin sister version, Emily went to a specialist, and he made some inquiries. Were you adopted, Emily Igorevna? It's true. Your parents went to the clinic several times. Your mother had a unique operation for those years. But the result was the same. Multiple failures of our research institute. She was in despair and even took medication for depression. Whenever she saw a woman with a stroller on the street, she burst into tears. That's when they took you in. You were born on the same day as your twin sister. Her name, as you know, was Iris Iris Janovna, was an exact replica of you in appearance, but grew up in a poor family. Why me? How could my parents separate the twins? Why didn't they give her away? Emily asked. The truth turned out to be painful. Twins are always born early with less weight. You were more affected. You were much weaker than your sister, malnourished, slow to gain weight. When your mom was discharged, she signed a waiver on one of her daughters, and the doctors already had an order for a baby, a girl. Your adoptive parents wanted a daughter. You grew up in a wealthier, more prosperous family, became a rich heiress, and are still alive. I think your adoption was the best thing that could have happened to you. Your sister was less fortunate. Iris was drinking, in treatment for addiction, all at the age of 16. You're 17. She got clean. She got pregnant. Her parents were dead by then. Bobby, Iris's son, was born at 40 weeks, healthy. She was living a normal life too. She died of a coincidence. She got sick. She started it. An infection set in, came into a crowded hospital. There was no one to help. Her roommate John took care of the baby. She'd given birth to him by another man, from whom we could not find out, but at the alleged time of conception, she worked in a wealthy family as a cleaner. Emily, having received the address of that place, went there in person to find out as much as she could about her late sister. It was getting dark. It was snowing. She parked outside the huge 2-story cottage and approached the gate. It was unlocked. Once inside, Emily walked in high heels across the carved paving stones to the door. She rang the bell. Inside, she heard birds singing. Soon an elderly woman opened the door. You? Is that you? It can't be. Emily's mind raced again. She realized that she had now been mistaken for her deceased sister. Why not? It can. But you're dead. That's what they told me. Jesus, the woman turned pale before her eyes. The life seemed to be coming out of her at that very moment. Just then, a gray-haired, statuesque man with a beautiful and even tan showed up behind her. My goodness, what do you want here? You've robbed us and come to our doorstep after all these years. What? Are you getting shameful? Emily shook her head. That's it. That's enough. I'm not who you think I am. My name is Emily. I'm Iris's twin sister who used to work for you, and I've come to learn the truth about my sister and my nephew. Iris has a child, but she wasn't pregnant when she worked here. Come in. God, you look just like her, the man lamented. His name was Edward Paul Gray, and his wife's name was Anastasia Victoria Gray. The house was beautiful, but uncomfortable, as if it were fashionable. It was more like a museum than a place to live. There were pictures everywhere of a handsome, dark-haired man, apparently their son. I was so scared. I'm still not comfortable, Anastasia, Victoria said. Why were you scared? Michael squinted. Yes, Anastasia. Did you think Iris had come back to steal something again? Her husband looked at her with disbelief and incomprehension. She sighed. Okay, I'll tell it like it is. This secret is weighing on me. Too heavy a burden. I can't carry it anymore. Your sister worked for us, and she didn't steal anything. I'm the one who talked to her. But I wasn't going to go to the police. I just needed her to leave our son Eli alone. He's too trusting. She twisted him around and started lying about being pregnant. No offense, but your sister wasn't a very nice person. Michael was hurt by her words. He felt there was something wrong with this story. You talk bad about my sister, and she's not a very nice person. Was she pregnant? Edward Paul frowned. She lied to me. I'm sure she did. And I took action, threatened her that if she told Eli about the baby, I'd put her in jail. The baby would be taken away from her. She didn't like the idea. Of course, she shut up and left. Have you been to her place, gone to see her? My husband asked me. Yes, my conscience was bothering me. I wanted to see what the child looked like. But they told me that Iris was dead and her son was living with his father. So I was right. All she wanted was a stranger's baby to tie our Eli to her. We're wealthy. Her family is, I'm sorry, penniless. And Eli is infertile. That was recently discovered. Really, since he was young, Edward added. Yes, he's married now, but they don't have children. So I did the right thing. Michael stood up. I'll bring Iris's son over here, and you can look at him. If that kid in the picture is your kid, they do look alike. Bobby's living with his stepfather now. He took Iris in with his son, but he's not his father. Michael walked away, leaving the door open behind him. He was annoyed at the way these people were talking about his sister. How could this woman know whose child Iris was carrying? Already at the gate, Emily ran into a man, the same man who was in all the pictures in the house. Hello, Emily said. The man was stunned. A tear rolled down his cheek from his eye. It's you. It's you. I've been looking for you. They told me you were gone. Oh my God. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tightly against him that her breath caught. I'm sorry, Eli, Emily began. She realized that she had called him by his name, that she was speaking to him in her voice, and it wasn't helping her explain her. Where on earth have you been? Why did my friend say you were buried in the town cemetery? I never dared to find the grave. Apparently you weren't there. Well, it happens. And the date of birth matches, Michael said. No, she's really dead. And I'm her sister Emily, she replied, and told him how she and her sister were separated. Ellie proved to be such a good conversationalist that she wanted to open up fully. She recounted how she woke up in the middle of a graveyard and how a boy, his son, had saved her. Told of what she had just learned at his parents' house. Eli listened to her for the first time, looking into her eyes and not wanting to let go. They stood outside his house, not even noticing how nervous his mother was. She kept pulling back the curtain. Seeing Emily made her uneasy again. It had only been a year since she'd managed to marry her precious son to a woman who suited him in every way. Anastasia Victoria Gray had chosen Eli to marry her best friend's daughter, Sarah. Sarah was a high society girl. Always impeccable looking, she knew 4 languages, but she couldn't cook at all. She was arrogant and cold. She was only interested in her job, fashion shows and stupid TV shows. Eli didn't even want to talk to her. but his mother persuaded him to get to know the girl better. Everything pressed on the fact that her father had died, that she was traumatized. That's why she was closed off. Sarah, Eli realized, was just cold and empty. He didn't see any warmth in her, didn't see anything to draw him in. But their parents were persistent. Eli and Sarah began to see each other often. They went to the theater, to the opera. Eli would have preferred something simpler. For example, he was forced to go to plays in a suit, trying to think of something clever to say after Sarah and her abstruse friends discussed the acting and the integrity of the production. He was frankly bored and didn't know how to let loose, how to escape. Eli and Sarah had a lavish, pompous wedding like she had always dreamed of. He was unhappy, and his mother saw it, but she clenched her teeth and said, "This life suits you, Sarah, wasn't suited to marriage at all." They moved into a new apartment downtown. They had everything they needed to be happy, except the most important thing.
Eli began to insist on children, and Sarah said she didn't want any. When Eli asked why she married him in the first place if she didn't want a family, his wife softened, but all attempts to conceive failed. They both got tested and found out that Eli was infertile. His parents were ready to send their son abroad, only for him to please them with grandchildren, but Sarah took him to her doctors.
She said she knew the best specialists. They all confirmed that Eli was infertile. It was a blow to him. He withdrew into himself. Marriage seemed like a mistake. Drowning in all these troubling thoughts, Eli arrived at his parents' house that evening. He got out of the car and saw her inside. Everything seemed to shrink. Everything turned upside down for a moment. He felt like he was the same person he'd been before. Eli talked about how he'd met her sister. Iris had taken a job with them when he had just returned from overseas. She was so beautiful that she didn't even need makeup. Emily had a short haircut, and Iris had a waist-length braid. He saw her and couldn't believe his eyes. Such a beauty dusting their place. It turned out that Iris was a great conversationalist, loved Brodsky, Hitchcock, and loved the same things he did. She knew the places in town that made their favorite shawarma with a unique recipe. They would walk around the city at night on foot. She didn't care that he had a car. She loved to walk on her own, to move, and she had accustomed him to it. After their walks together, Eli felt a pleasant fatigue in his legs. He would fall on his bed and fall asleep like a baby. They were just friends, but they couldn't tear themselves away from each other. They talked nonstop, as if they couldn't get enough of each other. She was the only one who made him feel alive. When Eli dared to kiss her, he expected her to push him away. He was nervous, afraid of losing her, but she responded to the kiss by pressing herself against him. Their affair lasted only a few months. Then his mother found out about it and claimed Iris had stolen her son from her. She would have denied it, but she nodded, apologized shamefully, and left their home for good. Of course, Eli followed her. He found her, but Iris refused to speak to him. "Your mom did it. She just confessed it to me. I was confused and scared when I saw you. She'll tell you herself, apparently. And I have to go," Emily said after finishing his story. "I'll see you around." He realized there was a completely different person standing in front of him, but he couldn't help himself as he looked at her. He saw Iris, yes, and talking to Emily was just as easy and pleasant. It was hard to separate the two for himself, but still, it was necessary. After all, they were two different people. "I'm bringing her son here." "I think he's yours." "Eli, no. I can't have children. You need to talk to your mom." "I think you'll learn a lot today." Emily left and Eli went to his parents' house. The conversation was hard. He was angry, grabbing his head, crying. His father and mother hadn't expected this reaction. "Mom, what has she given up to you?" "Johnson isn't a father. She's a redneck, a servant. She's stupid." "Not our level indeed." Eli sank tiredly onto the couch. "She was better than all of us. Better than all of us. I loved her, and now she's dead. And if the baby is mine, I will never forgive you," Eli said as he looked his mother in the eyes and walked away. He didn't know when Emily was coming over. He canceled all business appointments and had been waiting in his car outside his parents' house for her since 8:00. "Why are you sitting here? My mother got divorced. Why are you doing this to her? You know how she is. She always wants the best. She separated me from a woman who was pregnant. If Iris said the baby was mine, then it was mine. I have no doubt about that. It turns out my mother separated me from my child, broke my life. And if Emily hadn't found us, I never would have known I had a son at all." His words were bitterly true. His father nodded. "I didn't expect her to do that either. I mean, she always wanted grandchildren, didn't she? So what? That the girl was poor. I liked Iris, but I thought she really stole," he said. "Anastasia convinced us all of that and intimidated the girl, so she never showed up on our doorstep again. That's how you live with someone for so many years and don't even know what they're capable of."
Toward evening, Iris returned, got out of the car, and Bobby walked beside her. Ely walked over to the boy. My God, the way he was staring at him. Bobby has her nose. And the rest of him is mine. He's a carbon copy of me. I was fair-haired and easygoing when I was a kid, too.
Ely looked at Emily. She was wearing a long black coat, white snowflakes laying on her short hair. Her eyes looked with tenderness. He still saw her as his love, but he was already aware that she was different, and this did not upset him. On the contrary, he wanted to get to know her better. "We should take a test," Emily said. "I don't even know where they do those tests. I've looked into it. If you want, they'll take us in right now. I just want to say right off the bat that Bobby will be living with me. He doesn't know you at all. And I won't trust him to your mother, I'm sorry." Ely was confused. They both realized that a father would have every right to his son. But after what his mom had done, he didn't argue. "Okay, just let's go over to my place. I want to show him to his grandmother," Ely said. The boy, who had been standing still all this time, suddenly asked, "So you're my daddy, are you? I don't get it." Ely was dumbfounded. "I knew your mom well. You didn't say anything to him?" Ely asked Emily. The woman shook her head. "We have a lot to tell you. But first, I want a woman to see you. She'll probably cry." "You don't freak out. It's necessary," Ely said. He winked at Bobby and the three of them went into the house. When Anastasia saw the boy, she was stunned. Ellie's father immediately walked over to the child and extended his hand to him. "Well, hello there. You can call me grandfather," he said. "All right. And you call me Bobby? That's what everybody calls me." "That's a funny name you have," the boy replied. Anastasia walked over to the child, knelt down, and cried. She realized that the boy was an exact replica of Ely. There wasn't even any need for a test. Anastasia realized it all at once. Guilt came over her in such a way that she cried and couldn't stop. That's it. That's enough. Take her away," Ely asked his father. He took his wife upstairs, and the trio went to take a DNA test. Afterward, they went to a cafe where they ate ice cream. Ely occasionally wiped away tears. When Bobby talked about the delicious candy he picked up at the cemetery, Ely said, "I'll never forgive her." Emily understood, and she kind of felt sorry for his mom. She had done such a thing, and now she would have to accept the consequences of her deed. Bobby was now an adult and was starting to ask questions until they answered them, going off topic. Ely and Emily agreed that they would tell the boy everything once the DNA test was ready. When it came time to part ways, Ely realized he didn't want to leave. "How am I going to leave him now?" he asked Emily, completely confused. "I just took him away from his drinking stepfather. He promised me he'd get codependent, but I don't believe it. The boy needs to realize everything, get used to it. Besides, I've got a big shaggy dog at home right now. Let me take it for a walk," Ely begged. He couldn't let them go. Had he just gained a son now? Even if it turned out that Bobby wasn't his own, he was still Iris's child. And that was very meaningful to him. Okay, come with us. Emily realized that Eli didn't want to break up. Except with whom? With her or with the baby? Or still with the Iris he saw in her and Bobby? Probably all of them. Emily was ashamed to realize that she liked Eli a lot, and she thought her sister would have approved of their union. Those thoughts flashed through her mind against her will. She didn't want to think it. But the feelings arose in her on their own. She had fallen in love with Eli as early as yesterday, when she saw how he had reacted to her, and how much he loved Iris. He wasn't like his mother. There was decency in him. He was the victim in this situation. So was Bobby. So was Iris. And girls separated as children who never saw each other for the rest of their lives could well be considered victims too. But there was no bringing their parents back. There was no one left to ask questions. Iris was gone too. There's only Bobby to tell Eli a joke. There's Eli, secretly wiping away tears as he looks at the baby. Emily realized that he would have stayed asleep on the doorstep just to be near his son. They made their way to her apartment. Bobby and Emily began to clean up. Buddy made a mess. Bobby scolded him and scratched his head. He understood. You could see it in his intelligent eyes. Eli walked Buddy for almost an hour. During that time, Emily made dinner. You know, I feel like you guys are my mom and dad. It's like we have a family, Bobby said to Emily. She wanted terribly badly to tell the boy who she was to him, but she waited for the test result. For some reason, she was scared to talk about it. He'd be sitting in his new room. I'll go set him up at his new school tomorrow, and I'll quietly tell him that his mom was my sister Emily told Leo, okay, if you want, you can stay at my place. It's a comfy couch, she offered. Can I? I hate to leave terribly, but that's the way it's going to be tomorrow. You see, I can't leave him now, and neither can I leave you. It's as if I were tied to you. You're supposed to be a wife, she smiled. Our marriage is a sham, and Eli is my son, so she lied to me. She took me to her doctors, telling me I was infertile. Then one day I found birth control pills on her. She said it was a friend's pills, but I guess I just got caught. We have a really bad relationship. I never loved her, but that doesn't change the fact that you're married. Let me stay because of him. I'll work out my marital status. We'll get back to this conversation. Emily bed Eli on the couch.
She didn't think he was serious. But the very next day, Michael did file for divorce. He didn't even wait for the test results.
What were you missing? Iris asked him. She was angry. Honesty, kids, a wife, and borscht. I'm a husband. Don't you feel like a wife? Running around to your parties, your bohemian parties that make me sick. I want to be at home, watching movies at night. I want the comforts of home. I want to hug my wife, raise my kids, be needed. Do you realize you're married? Iris threw the glass at the wall and didn't answer him. You lied to me that I was infertile, Michael asked. Yes, because I'm not going to ruin my figure for the sake of a schnook, and I did the abortion for you. So get out. I don't care about you, she said venomously. That was the end of their marriage. That evening, after picking up the lab report, Michael walked up the stairs and rang the doorbell. Emily opened it for him. She was wearing no makeup and a house robe. I thought you'd call. Did something happen? She asked. I filed for divorce, and I'm also Bobby's father. A kid showed up behind me. What? I'm your daddy. Michael went downstairs and hugged his son. He and Emily told him the whole truth. Michael had several pictures of Iris. Finally, the boy had a picture of his mom. Emily told her side of the story. That same night, Michael got up the courage to tell her that he wanted to be with them. I know it's rash, but I can't help it. I'm drawn to you. I want to be part of the family since he's my son. Let's raise him together. Let's just try it. Do you want to move in with me? You have a wife, right? No, I have my own apartment. But it's a little far from here. No, it's okay. Bobby just started a new school. You don't have to push him again. I have a big apartment. There's plenty of room for everyone. Stay, the couch is all yours. On one condition, Emily looked at him seriously. What's that? You'll go out with Buddy? Michael laughed. Aren't you a dog person? I am. I was going to get a bald cat on Friday, but now I don't know. At first, Michael flatly refused to talk to his mother and would not show her his grandson. Only Grandpa Edward, who loved Bobby to bits, came to visit. Anastasia could not get through to her son, so one day she came to her mother. She apologized, saying that she repented. Emily and Eli decided to give the grandmother a trial to her grandson. She came to visit them and told them what she had done to his mom. Bobby listened to her with a serious look. I'm sorry, for God's sake. I want to hang out with you so badly. You're my only grandchild, she said. Okay, he smiled and hugged her. Will you forgive me? Grandma repeated. It's not like you killed anyone. And I don't have many grandmothers to throw around, Bobby replied. Eli, following his son's example, also softened. A year later, when the twins were born, Anastasia helped with them and taught the young mom the finer points of infant care. They became a real family. John did get codependent and became an assistant at a rehab clinic for addicts. Bobby sometimes comes to visit him, and there is a new monument in the cemetery. Emily ordered a beautiful headstone for her sister next to the grave that Jessica and Michael made for her. She kept it in memory of what had happened, and if it hadn't been for their horrible act, she would never have found her happiness. Cynthia noticed it a long time ago. Sometimes strange and sometimes even inexplicable events happen in the surgery department. A person is brought in, and it seems that he has only 5 minutes to live, maybe even less. Especially if he is seriously injured or the disease is too neglected. Then everything depends not only on the doctor, but also on the favorable coincidence of circumstances. Of course, we cannot say that in such almost hopeless situations, the doctor should rely only on help from above. No, in severe cases, the surgeon relies on his own knowledge and experience, not forgetting that you need to act decisively without wasting time. Such was the case with Johnny, a homeless man admitted to the ward 2 days ago, just as Cynthia was on night duty. Cynthia, there's something wrong. Megan ran into the resident's room and exclaimed. Cynthia looked at the nurse in surprise. Megan was new to the department, but she had already proved herself to be a good nurse. She was not afraid of heavy patients and had a strong nerve. What's up? Did you see a ghost? Cynthia asked with a touch of irony. I wish I had. There's a homeless man, wounded, penetrating stab wound, came in and collapsed on the floor. Right in the emergency room, Megan blurted out. Cynthia's face changed immediately when she heard that. In a case like this, every second counts. You can't afford to delay. Prep the operating theater. I'll be right there, she said. But we're a private clinic. Should we call the police? The nurse hesitated. We will, but later. Right now we have to save the victim. We'll do the rest afterwards, Cynthia said rather stiffly. The nurse nodded in agreement and hurried to carry out the doctor's orders. Cynthia, on the other hand, hesitated. A stab wound in a homeless man. Cynthia wondered. The clinic was indeed private. And what would Superintendent Walter have to say about it tomorrow morning? As head of the clinic, they're tight-knit. Paid rooms, overpriced medication. Even though the clinic is private. She's going to get in trouble for that surgery. All right, so now we're just going to leave poor Johnny bleeding in the street. What about the doctor's oath? No. Whatever happens. Cynthia decided to take action and began to prepare for the operation. Johnny looked to be in his early 30s. He had no time to give his name or the circumstances of his injuries. After all, he had only managed to get to the clinic and collapsed on the floor. Cynthia realized at once that the injury was serious. According to statistics, the lethal outcome of such abdominal injuries is almost 80%. This meant that the operation was likely to fail. The nurse who was to be her assistant realized this. But Cynthia was certainly not going to give up early. She was determined to fight on, no matter what. The operation was complicated. In Cynthia's memory, there were only two of those. For a long time, she couldn't stop the bleeding, which threatened to kill the patient. As it turned out later, Johnny had a rare blood type, which made the task much more difficult. A couple of times, Cynthia wanted to let go of the clamp and simply burst into tears, admitting to herself that there was nothing she could do. Probably such moments occur in the life of everyone who has ever been on the verge of despair. Sensing the doctor's condition, the operating nurse tried not to lose her composure and clearly fulfill all tasks. At one point, there was even a threat of cardiac arrest in the patient, but Cynthia coped. She was able to normalize vital signs and did the near impossible. By the end of the 4-hour surgery, she was barely on her feet from fatigue and despite her inner tension. "Cynthia, we won." "Are you a real magician?" said the operating room nurse Veronica with a smile. "Oh, come on, you don't say." "That's not me, just lucky," replied Cynthia. "But my grandmother, Mrs. Amanda, a field surgeon, was a magician. She was the one who could get even the most hopeless back on their feet." The rest of the shift flew by. Johnny was surprisingly strong and was clearly going to pull through. After checking his condition, Cynthia nodded with satisfaction. "There you'll live. The main thing is to make sure that the lesson is good for you. Many people don't notice such signs of doom." Naturally, the patient could not respond to the doctor's remark, as he was in a medically induced coma. Cynthia could only hope that Johnny would accept her mental attitude. A new day began and new troubles began. Soon the clinic was filling up again with the medical staff who had come on shift during the day. Here Cynthia was in for a very unpleasant surprise. When the police officers, together with Walter, arrived at the ward, they interviewed the nurse on duty and carefully recorded her statements. They spoke to Megan and Veronica, who, while admiring Cynthia's professionalism, put it all out there. "Cynthia, you've caused us a lot of trouble. Why did you get involved with that homeless guy?" Walter, the superintendent, hissed. "What's wrong, Walter?" "Well, what was I supposed to do in that case?" Cynthia asked him in surprise. He looked at her with undisguised anger. "What's wrong, Cynthia?" "Everything is wrong. That tramp is a wanted man, you know. He's kidnapped the 8-year-old son of a businessman, Mr. Jonathan Henderson. The CCTV footage shows the tramp taking the boy to the park. And after that, Bruce Henderson was never seen again. You get it? This Johnny of yours is a murderer and a criminal who should be tried on the spot. What makes you think he had anything to do with the kidnapping? Maybe it wasn't like that." Cynthia frowned. "Oh, don't be ridiculous, Cynthia. It wasn't like that. And what was it like then? Pray tell. If you'd had children of your own, then you'd know that little boys shouldn't go out with tramps," Walter exclaimed angrily. At the mention of children, Cynthia's face darkened. She really had no children, so it was a blow to the heart, but that was not what upset her. It was that the Henderson family name was familiar to her. Her husband, Kevin, had recently considered himself a business associate of Mr. Jonathan Henderson. Cynthia herself was not acquainted with the businessman, but she had heard very conflicting information about him. It was said that Mr. Jonathan Henderson had made his fortune through his wife, Kimberly, who had left him a substantial inheritance and a successful business. The sound of the door opening brought her out of her troubled musings. Kevin was standing on the threshold. His eyes were glowing with anger. "What have you done, Cynthia? Why did you save that bastard?" he blurted out. "There's no place to test him." Walter gloomed and quietly left the office, leaving Cynthia alone with her husband. "Kevin, why are you talking to me like that? Did I give you any reason to?" Her face contorted with anger. "You've got to be kidding me. What excuse do you need? You saved a criminal, you know. And Jonathan Henderson doesn't forgive that. He'll kill you. He'll grind you to a pulp. Just remember," Kevin said. "Today you're a doctor, tomorrow you could be in jail." "Kevin, are you threatening me?" Cynthia turned pale. "I didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. "And who rescued that tramp? Do you think the police didn't notice?" "No, they didn't. A private clinic, a surgeon. Tell me, why did he come to your shift? Why did he choose a private clinic instead of going to the city hospital? Maybe the drifter was counting on something? Or knew something?" Cynthia turned pale. Frankly speaking, she had not expected her husband to talk to her in such a way, which turned into a real interrogation. Could she have done anything differently? Should she have left the man to bleed to death? Even if he was a criminal, how could she know that Johnny was involved in some kind of kidnapping? Although the accusation against him sounds naive to say the least. Just because a boy was seen with a tramp doesn't mean anything. The boy could have just got lost and wandered off. After all, someone hurt Johnny himself, and it's unlikely it was an 8-year-old boy. Especially since, according to Kevin, Bruce walked beside the tramp completely voluntarily. And that's saying something. Cynthia's mood finally soured. Mr. Jonathan was not a man to be trifled with. Neither did the head doctor of the clinic, who was his friend. It didn't take long for Mr. Miles to be summoned, unlike Walter and her husband. He didn't beat around the bush and informed me that Cynthia had been retroactively fired. "But I was just doing my job," she whispered. "And I don't care what you were doing, Cynthia. I don't want any trouble, especially not with Jonathan Henderson. Bruce is his adopted son. His wife's dead. He's become a stepfather to the boy. You see, the tramp's unconscious, but they're going to move him to the prison hospital, and they're looking for the boy. So I had to take action, you know. You'll probably get a criminal record. Jonathan Henderson's going to take it to court. He thinks you were in cahoots with that poor bloke. It's not for nothing that he came to you for help," Mr. Miles said without a trace of embarrassment. Cynthia's eyes brimmed with tears. What does that mean? She could be dismissed from her job just like that. What for? Anyone in her position would have done the same thing. She's a medical professional. Unfortunately, Cynthia couldn't change her boss's mind. How could she? When you're accused and called an accomplice by your own husband, Kevin. Of course, he was clearly overreacting. They'd had a lot of fights before. But it's never gone this far. Was the husband so dependent on this Jonathan Henderson that he could talk like this? It's unthinkable. Just like that, like a magic wand. The effect of a successful operation was replaced by bitter disappointment. Cynthia looked longingly at Johnny, handcuffed to the hospital gurney, and smiled sadly. The tramp was just coming round and helplessly trying to find his savior with his eyes, though it was far from certain that he remembered her face. After all, during the initial examination before the operation, Johnny had been unconscious, delirious the whole time. The dismissal process took a little while. Mr. Miles, eager to please Jonathan Henderson, did everything he could to get Cynthia on the street as soon as possible. Understandably so. The far-sighted head doctor was trying to protect himself from possible repercussions. This way, he could just resign retroactively and be done with it. Cynthia walked out of the clinic and exposed her tear-wet face to the sun. Passers-by passed by and looked in amazement at the young woman with sad gray eyes, who was crying. I didn't feel like going home. After the conversation with Kevin, her soul longed for peace and quiet, but she didn't want to listen to reproaches and accusations. She'd had enough of that. Thank you all for your efforts. Not much to say, for in the middle of the day, silence could only be found in a city park. Cynthia crossed to the opposite side of the street and headed to her desired location. Thanks to the nice weather, the park was crowded. Elderly people, couples strolling around, taking pictures of each other against the backdrop of the surrounding beauty, and people who just wanted to be alone with nature. There was a huge fountain in the middle of the park, which provided everyone with a pleasant freshness. Children cheered and squealed, while adults looked on with a smile, remembering themselves as children. Cynthia's mood lightened a little. She walked over to the hot bakery stand and bought a couple of scones to feed the swans and the squirrels scurrying around. The last time she'd done that was a few years ago when she'd first met Kevin. Back then, in that time of romance and bouquets of flowers, they'd taken many walks, visited cafes and cinemas. But all that was in the past. Kevin was very different now. Now he spent a lot of time at work. And when he came home, he often turned into a silent, sullen man. Kevin used to save money on little things, but now he put money aside for everything he could and couldn't afford. And this despite the fact that Cynthia earned a good salary at the private clinic where she had transferred 3 years ago. During that time, she had never regretted her decision. However, the transfer itself was initiated by her husband, who knew her head doctor personally. How long will you hump in this city surgery? A private surgeon has more money and a higher status, Kevin said. Cynthia was hesitant for a long time because she had done her internship in the Department of Surgery, and in fact it was her way into life, but on the other hand, she did not want to stand still either. After all, the saying goes, under the lying stone does not flow water. Only now she realized that her husband Kevin thought only about money, and the transfer to a private clinic had been initiated by him for that very reason. Now that his business interests had intersected with his wife's work, Kevin did not hesitate to do everything he could to defame her. Well, couldn't he have stepped in and said a word? Cynthia thought of Mr. Jonathan. She didn't know the answer to her question. Especially as relations with her husband had been rather strained of late. Perhaps this was due to the frequent visits and interference of her mother-in-law, Mrs. Kimberly, who came whenever she pleased, and most often on days when Cynthia was resting from her night's duty. Yet Mrs. Kimberly had a constant thirst for activity that had nothing to do with hard work or a love of cleanliness. Most likely she just wanted to find some flaw in Cynthia's impeccable reputation to reproach her for it. For instance, Mrs. Kimberly could easily initiate a general cleaning, knowing full well that Cynthia had returned from a heavy shift. She also never missed a family party so that she could turn up and do her bit. Naturally, Cynthia was patient, as many daughters-in-law are in this world. Showing character right away was not something she wanted to do. She valued Kevin and realized that it was unlikely that her mother-in-law would love her as her own daughter. So she had to take everything for granted and put up with the fact that Mrs. Kimberly was gradually making her life a living hell. A separate topic of conversation from the mouth of her mother-in-law was childlessness. At first it was innocent talk with an undercurrent that hinted very vaguely that Cynthia was infertile. Then Mrs. Kimberly had the courage to speak of it directly. "Look, Cynthia, when do you think you'll have children? You're what, 30, 35? Are you going to go to your son's graduation party when you're retired?" Mrs. Kimberly said ironically. Cynthia turned pale. "Well, you know very well it's not up to us. First one course of treatment, then another. And the case, as they say, hasn't moved," she said. Mrs. Kimberly grinned. Well, let's see what's going on there, because my friends are already laughing at me. When are you going to be a grandmother? They are about to marry their grandchildren, and you still can't get pregnant." Cynthia's tears welled up with resentment. What could she say when medicine was powerless in these cases? No, she had once suggested to Kevin that he take a child from the orphanage, but he had flatly refused. "No, Cynthia, it's not for me. I don't like these adoptions. I don't know what kind of heredity they have. Who are their parents? What if they're criminals or worse, alcoholics? It's all in the genes. And what do you want us to be taken care of in our old age by some moron who will wait for my pension?" Cynthia shook her head. "You shouldn't say that. I don't think that's true. Children don't inherit the traits of their biological parents, especially if they are taken from an orphanage right after birth." Kevin looked at her as if she'd said something stupid. "Of course, it's easy for you to judge from the outside. I have a business to run, and I need a proper heir. And who do you suggest I take an alcoholic, a vagrant? How can I give him my business, which I've been developing for so many years?" Kevin was indignant. Cynthia blushed to the roots of her hair. "Honey, did you ever think that your son might grow up to be even more successful than you? Become an asset to the business? Maybe even more successful than you and me combined," she suggested. Kevin pressed his lips together resentfully. The notion that some foster child might be better than he was offended him to the core. No, it wouldn't be like that. All those foster kids would be just as much losers as their parents. The parents will drink, party, spend money, and then go to jail. They'll come back with tuberculosis. No, I don't want that kind of pleasure for nothing. He cut him off. Perhaps if her mother-in-law had not been on her husband's side, Cynthia might have persuaded him to take the baby from the orphanage. But since Mrs. Kimberly was also against it, Cynthia's chances were practically nil. Her mother-in-law, on the other hand, took real aesthetic pleasure in hurting Cynthia time after time by talking about the children. She would suddenly begin to speculate aloud about what kind of nursery she would like for her grandchildren, or she would talk about the beautiful pram her friends' grandchildren had, and also that she would like to give her grandchildren to the 10th kindergarten, and not to the 3rd. Cynthia was pulled out of a state of sad reflection by someone's quiet, ingratiating voice. "Auntie, I suppose you like to feed the birds?" Cynthia turned round and saw a girl of about 7 behind her, wearing a dress 2 sizes too big and old, worn-out sandals. "Yeah, do you want to join us? Come on, let's go. We'll feed the birds and then the squirrel." "Do you know how funny they are?" replied Cynthia. The little girl suddenly tensed up and looked round, then looked again at the 2 buns that Cynthia had thoughtfully bought for the birds. Little Elizabeth looked at Cynthia in such a way that she felt uneasy. There was too much longing in the eyes of this girl who stood in the park and looked at the treats with hungry eyes. "Would you like me to buy you a bun?" Cynthia asked slowly and cautiously. The little stranger nodded happily. "Of course. But I'd like to have 2 buns. For my brother, he's staying with his grandmother." "I went to look for something to eat," the girl replied. "My grandmother is sick and my parents are dead. Sometimes I work in the park, though my grandmother swears. But what can I do? Do you want? I can dance or recite a poem." Cynthia's heart ached for the little girl. "Oh, really? Come on, just take it for free. Do you want me to go to the shop and buy your brother whatever you want? I'll get you some juice. What are you going to eat? If not, let's go to a cafe and have a proper meal," she suggested. "What's your name anyway?" "I'm Cynthia. You can just call me Aunt Cynthia." The girl paused, as if gathering her strength and thinking whether to tell this strange woman her name or not. At last the little girl said, "And I'm Elizabeth. Elizabeth Harris. We live near here, in the old annex. We used to have a big house, but it burned down and the firemen were able to save the outhouse. My grandmother and I live there, and we've recently had a baby brother." Cynthia looked at the little girl in surprise. "A baby brother? You said your parents died. He must be little. What is he, a year old?" Elizabeth smiled and took a bun from Cynthia's hands and took a bite. "No, little brother's almost as old as me. He's 8 years old. His name is Bruce. He's a new arrival, but his grandmother took him in. What's he gonna do? Wander the streets on his own? It's nice and cozy in our annex. It's not hot in summer, warm in winter, and the stove burns so hot that I even sleep without a blanket. True, we have to prepare firewood from summer, but we manage, the girl continued. Cynthia found the girl's story strange. She was even more alarmed by the boy's name, Bruce. Wasn't he the same Bruce who had disappeared because of Johnny the Tramp? Cynthia wanted to ask the question directly, but then decided to proceed more cautiously. After all, she was talking to a small child who could be frightened or traumatized by an awkward word. There weren't many street kids in town with the name Bruce. Maybe it's a different kid who has taken up with her granddaughter's grandmother in search of sustenance. What's your grandmother's name, Elizabeth? Cynthia asked cautiously. Mrs. Amanda, the girl answered readily. Cynthia smiled. Can I speak to your grandmother? Don't be afraid. I won't do anything bad to you. I'll just buy some groceries and bring them home to you. And if necessary, I'll go get some medicine for your grandma. I'm actually a doctor. Elizabeth's eyes widened in surprise. What did you say? You're a doctor? Wow. Then of course let's go to Grandma's house. See if you can give her some advice or give her the right medicine. She's treating herself. You know, she has these little ulcers on her legs. If you don't treat them, they get bigger. I don't even know what it's called. Cynthia shook her head sadly. It's probably trophic ulcers. They often haunt the elderly. I understand. If necessary, I'll write the right prescription and prescribe treatment. I'm actually a surgeon, but I think in your grandmother's case it might be possible to do without surgery, Cynthia said. Elizabeth listened carefully, as if she understood every word. Cynthia went to the shop and bought a huge bag of groceries before going to the house. Like any smart, thrifty woman, she took everything she needed to make a proper lunch, dinner, and breakfast. As it turned out, Elizabeth really lived not far from the city park and the place where it smoothly passed into the private sector, where several dozen houses, similar to each other as twin brothers, were cosily settled. However, the annex, in which the grandmother and granddaughter lived, stood out even against the background of all the other buildings because it was very small, and of course old and in need of repair. Cynthia realized this as soon as she approached the gate. The roof had rotted away and was covered with old slate, which was probably also leaking and letting in moisture. The panes of glass were dirty and in places covered with cracks that had been covered with sticky tape for safety. The squeaky door was creaking, and Cynthia thought it might as well not be closed at all, especially in the summertime. There was nothing to steal from the house, and it was unlikely that any burglars would attempt this inconspicuous outbuilding. As soon as she stepped through the door, Cynthia could smell the strong odor of medicine. Like any medical man, she considered them an indispensable part of her life. Letting Elizabeth go, Cynthia followed with the bag of groceries. The little girl took a few timid steps and then said, "Grandma, hello. I brought you a doctor. She is a surgeon. She knows how to treat your illness." For a moment, there was a tense pause in the room. Then someone's tired, elderly voice answered. "Thank you. Is it convenient for her to come to our house? This isn't the right place at all. Oh, it's embarrassing." Cynthia smiled and immediately hastened to diffuse the situation. "Oh, come on, Mrs. Amanda. I'm a doctor. I don't care about your surroundings and the fact that there are no repairs. That's not what I'm interested in. Let me examine you and tell you what can be done and what medication to prescribe. You may even have to take a course of medication," said Cynthia. Mrs. Amanda looked at her guest doubtfully. "Well, I don't know. I've been on my own for a long time. I can't walk to the hospital. We don't have a car either. And there's no one to take care of me but Elizabeth." But Cynthia nodded and looked pityingly at the old woman. Of course, she knew how hard it was for her to be alone with her little granddaughter. Now they had a little homeless child with them. If Mrs. Amanda had a daughter or a son, they would have taken her to the hospital and seen a doctor. And so she could only rely on herself and on the help of her underage granddaughter, who needs to go to school, not wander around the park and beg. All right, let's get to the examination. Where can I wash my hands? Cynthia asked businesslike. The old woman hesitated for a moment and then asked Elizabeth to show her the bathroom. On her way to it, Cynthia caught a glimpse of the boy in the next room, who was huddled in a corner, clearly afraid of her presence. This fact was extremely alarming. There was something wrong with this, no matter how she looked at it. Usually street children do not behave like this, because the street promotes the development of courage and inconsideration in them, which gives them the right to beg and ask people for anything they want. This boy seemed quiet and a little scared. And he was also clearly wary of Cynthia, who in his mind was a danger in his own home. Cynthia proceeded to inspect, of course, aware that Mrs. Amanda's legs had probably already developed trophic ulcers. Nevertheless, what she saw shocked her even as an experienced medical surgeon. The situation was aggravated by the fact that Mrs. Amanda was unable to buy expensive medicines. So she used the ones that were absolutely useless in her situation. Not only that, but she was self-medicating, which in itself is very dangerous. You know, Mrs. Amanda, I'd advise you to go to hospital. I'll prescribe the right medication and ointments, but you may need a blood test along with a whole range of other tests. These will help to determine the true picture of the illness, Cynthia began. Mrs. Amanda looked longingly at her guest. I'm sorry, but how do you envisage it? Who's going to take me? You'd have to hire a taxi to get to the hospital. And you know what they're charging these days. My pension is small. I've been a cook for almost 30 years. I'm always on my feet, so I earned it. I'd keep working. I can't stand anymore, and I can't find a sedentary job. Let me tell you about the accident that killed my kids. They just bought a second-hand car. They had been saving up for it for several years, and then they took to the motorway and went to a neighboring town for a visit. A drunk driver drove into oncoming traffic. It was a no-win situation. It's a good thing Elizabeth was with me, or I wouldn't be alive right now. I'd have someone to take care of me. Elizabeth and that boy are the only ones left. At the mention of the boy, Cynthia shuddered. Perhaps this was a chance to make inquiries about him, but it must be done as quietly as possible so he wouldn't hear. Look, Mrs. Amanda, do you know Bruce's surname or how you came to have him in the first place? Mrs. Amanda looked anxiously at Cynthia. Look, isn't he the reason you're here? Maybe you're not a doctor at all. If you want Bruce to have him, I'm not giving him to anyone. Johnny brought him to me because he said he needed help. And I've known Johnny a long time. He's a good man. He wouldn't do anything bad to us. He told me the boy needed help. So he did. I remember Johnny when he was a teenager. He used to come into my canteen for a snack. He was like a son. But then he got mixed up with a bad crowd, went to jail, did some time, but then he got his head on straight. Except Johnny's stepdad drank up Johnny's flat. That's how he ended up on the street. At the mention of the boy, Cynthia turned pale. At that moment, she realized that Johnny didn't really mean to hurt anyone, but had other aims. Immediately, a rather slender picture began to form in her mind of what might have really happened. For some reason, guessing that little Bruce needed help, Johnny had decided to hide him at his acquaintance's house, and then he was the victim of a robbery that nearly cost him his life. Mrs. Amanda, don't even think about it. I don't want to take anyone away from you. It's just that I operated on Johnny tonight. He's been stabbed in the stomach, you know, and they're accusing him of kidnapping Bruce. If you'll let me, I'd like to talk to the boy and find out what happened, Cynthia said, hardly able to contain her excitement. Mrs. Amanda turned pale. Of course, dear, talk. My God, what's happened to my neighbor? He was like a son to me, who'd lay a hand on him. He's so kind by nature he wouldn't hurt a fly. And then he gets a knife in the stomach. Cynthia, seeing the worry in the old woman's eyes, hastened to reassure her. No, don't worry, he'll live. I'm sure the operation was a success, although it was hard around 4 in the morning. I came straight from the night shift to see you today. I was sacked for that case, but don't worry, I'll write your prescriptions without all that red tape. You know what I mean? You are treated not with the medicines you have at home now, but with the ones you need in your case. You're making things worse for yourself. And if this keeps going on, it could come to, I don't even want to talk about it. I mean, amputation, you know? Mrs. Amanda had tears in her eyes. Unfortunately, like many elderly people, she was afraid to go to the doctor and decided to treat herself. Leaving her grandmother with her grandson for a while, Cynthia left the room and approached a frightened Bruce. My name is Cynthia. And you're Bruce, aren't you? The boy nodded timidly and looked at her with the look of a hunted wolf cub. Realizing that he was unlikely to say anything, Cynthia continued the conversation. Bruce, I'm sorry to ask you this directly, but Uncle Johnny, who helped you, didn't kidnap you, did he? At the mention of Johnny, Bruce's eyes flashed with joy. No, not at all. Of course he didn't kidnap me. He and I were just hanging out, and Uncle Johnny was always helping. Once he brought a squirrel to my house and showed it through the window, and carved toys out of wood, and little things like that. Anyway, he kept me entertained. Cynthia raised an eyebrow in surprise. Entertained you? Why couldn't you go and entertain yourself? And why did he keep pointing out the window? Bruce gloomed. Well, how can I tell you? My stepfather wouldn't let me go outside. I stayed home all day long. All I could do was open the window a little bit to get some fresh air and see what was going on outside. That's when I met Uncle Johnny. He often went about his business and I waved at him. One wave at first, and then we started greeting each other. And one day I managed to open the window more than usual, and I talked to him. The boy's rambling story brought tears to Cynthia's eyes. She had expected to hear anything but this. The boy had been held hostage by his stepfather, who kept him locked up like a golden cage. Bruce, why didn't your stepfather let you go outside? Were you misbehaving? Cynthia asked cautiously. The boy shook his head resolutely. No, I was behaving well. I even went to school. And then my stepfather suddenly decided that I shouldn't be shown to people, locked me up at home, and arranged with the school principal for me to study remotely. When I didn't do well, I had a tutor come to me. Actually, Uncle Jonathan is not my real father, he's my stepfather. You see, his aunt comes to him all the time. She doesn't like me and locks me in a room when they meet, drinks wine, watches TV, and I have to sit quiet as a mouse and not make any noise. At that moment, Cynthia felt uneasy. Just the thought of Bruce having fun with some girl and his adopted son sitting around waiting for it to be over made Cynthia uncomfortable. She thought for a moment, then asked, Bruce, can you tell anyone else about this if you need to? You know, like the police or the courts? The boy looked at her eagerly. Of course I can. I'd just like to see Uncle Johnny because we came here and then he disappeared. Cynthia frowned, not knowing whether to tell the truth or not, but then, weighing up the pros and cons, she told him what had really happened. A tear immediately rolled down Bruce's cheek. Will he live? Aunt Cynthia? Uncle Johnny, he's a good man, he can't die. She smiled. Of course, I promise. There are different cases, of course, but of this I am 100% sure. Your Uncle Johnny is a real fighter. He's got a grip on life like no other. So you can be proud of him, and I can be proud of you. But now I guess I'd better get going. I have to go to the pharmacy and get some medicine for your grandmother, and then I'll be back. You stay here. Don't go anywhere. You've got enough groceries for now. I'm going to try and deal with your stepfather." At the mention of him, Bruce suddenly turned pale and looked anxiously at his guest. "Maybe you shouldn't. Or at least be careful, okay? What's wrong with him?" Cynthia asked in surprise. Bruce hesitated for a moment, but then said, "He's not a good man. When my mom got sick, Uncle Jonathan wouldn't let her go to the doctor, brought him home. In fact, I don't think he was a doctor, he was a gangster. He had blue tattoos on his arms. You know, you don't, but he did." Cynthia tried to keep her cool. She nodded demurely. To tell the truth, she wanted to make a scene with Mr. Jonathan, who pretended to be a prominent businessman, but was in fact a common criminal. And her husband Kevin was a good man, too, finding himself such a companion. I can't tell you. Warning Mrs. Amanda that she was going to the pharmacy, Cynthia left the house and breathed in the fresh air. After the stuffy atmosphere of the dark outbuilding, the street seemed to her a paradisiacal place. Entering the pharmacy, she recalled from memory the list of medicines she needed for her treatment. It should be said that all the drugs from this group were freely available. That is, did not require a prescription. But for some reason, the pharmacist refused to give her the medicine. "They are freely available," Cynthia objected. "I'm a doctor, so I'm the one who made the prescription. If you doubt me, I work at a private clinic called Avicenna." "Well, I should say I used to work at Avicenna," she mumbled embarrassedly, thinking, and then decided to call the pharmacy manager. For a moment, Cynthia felt that a scandal was unlikely to be avoided. The superintendent turned out to be a woman in her 40s. Her fingers were covered with rings, and around her neck she wore a braided chain with a massive heart-shaped pendant. "Is there a problem?" the superintendent asked. Cynthia was convinced that this was going to be a confrontational conversation. "Yes, I want to buy these medicines, and they won't let me have them," she said. The manager frowned. "They won't release them, you say? You should know that you need a prescription to buy such drugs." So the employee is absolutely right. And if you don't have a prescription, you can go to another pharmacy. Cynthia's lips trembled. "Look, you must have misunderstood something. I am a doctor and I know what medicines are on the market. Mrs. Amanda needs them for her tropical ulcers from an allergic reaction. And you're stalling and stalling instead of giving us a chance to cure this woman," Cynthia said with annoyance. "My name is Cynthia, and I'm a doctor, a surgeon at the Avicenna private clinic. You may have heard of it?" Emily shook her head doubtfully. Then she thought about it, picked up the phone, and decided to call Mr. Miles, the doctor. Cynthia waited nervously. In the meantime, the superintendent was already talking to the chief physician, and as her face changed, Cynthia realized that she was likely to be denied her medication. Unfortunately, her premonition had not deceived her. Finished speaking, Emily forcefully put down the receiver of the machine. Then she walked over to Cynthia and said, with emphasized contempt, "Look, you're an ex-doctor, so I don't need to be the one who's trying to push my way in here. If you don't like it, nobody's keeping you here, and if you resent it, I'll call security. You're just pretending to be a doctor. She's a doctor. How come you got fired? And what's more, you're facing a criminal offense, and you want to drag me down with you? No, sweetheart, you go back to where you came from. You'll get no help from me." Cynthia's eyes welled up with tears from the offense. What's that supposed to mean? She can't buy medicine anymore. She slammed the door in her face and went to the next pharmacy, which was a few hundred meters away. There she was sold the medicine without any problems. However, her mood was already hopelessly ruined. She wanted to do the best to help an elderly person, but it turned out quite the opposite. On the way back, the telephone in her purse rang. Cynthia wondered who it could be. She picked up the receiver and heard the familiar voice of her mother-in-law, Mrs. Kimberly. "Hello, Cynthia. Where have you been? I've been waiting for you from work for an hour. I bought some cleaning products. I thought I'd clean the windows today and maybe the floors. Your place is such a mess, and you're nowhere to be found. I called Kevin. He doesn't know anything. You've been a little too free lately. You're not out there, are you? 'Cause I've seen a lot of you doctors in my time. I know what you do on your night shifts." And that was the last straw for Cynthia. "What night watch? What are you getting at, Mrs. Kimberly? Don't you know what happened today?" She was outraged. "I operated on a patient at 4 a.m. who came into the clinic with a stab wound to the abdomen. And you're accusing me of infidelity?" "Yes, if you have any doubts, you can inquire at the registrar's office, or even call the head doctor himself. He'll tell you what really happened." Mrs. Kimberly realized she'd overstepped her bounds. However, her mother-in-law was never very good at apologizing, so she decided that the best defense was attack. "Don't raise your voice at me. I'm not your maid. If I said I'm coming today, then be ready and wait for me. Like I have to clean your windows, your fridge is a mess. Don't you have time to cook something? Kevin's gonna get an ulcer from an empty stomach." Cynthia just burst into flames. "No, Mrs. Kimberly, your Kevin won't get an ulcer," she said. "He only eats at restaurants. He doesn't eat much at home. He comes home at midnight. I've cooked for him a few times, but nobody eats but me. You know, it's not very nice to work all night and then sit alone waiting for your husband to come home." But Mrs. Kimberly couldn't be persuaded. As mothers-in-law often do, it's always the son-in-law who's closest. And no matter what the daughter-in-law did, it was useless. It felt like she was about to explode with anger. Cynthia interrupted the call and put the phone away in her purse. Once again, her mother-in-law had done everything she could to humiliate her, once again to assert herself at someone else's expense. Of course, Cynthia didn't know that Mrs. Kimberly was actually jealous of her. After all, her sister-in-law had been to medical school. Mrs. Kimberly had a technical degree and a job as a seamstress in a factory. However, she worked there for a short time and left the place when the country was gripped by the thirst for commerce and business. She divorced when Kevin was 2 years old, and the reason for the divorce was that the father of her child was paid too little. Mrs. Kimberly, on the other hand, would only settle for $1 million she had never seen in her life. Is it any wonder that Kevin grew up to be so greedy and unscrupulous about running a business? After all, we can only guess what his mother had to go through in order to accumulate the initial capital, which the son then led in the development of his own business. Back at Mrs. Amanda's, Cynthia set about dressing and treating the wounds on the sick woman's legs. Of course, a nurse on the ward would do this, but as Cynthia was now alone, she had no other choice. "Cynthia, thank you so much. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't know what to do. I can see it's bad, but I haven't told Elizabeth about it so as not to frighten her. I don't want the girl to cry and be afraid I'll be gone," grandmother said with feeling. Cynthia smiled and replied quietly, "Don't worry, Mrs. Amanda, everything will be all right. The medicine will kick in now and you'll feel better. But it's too soon. Remember my words, you will dance at your granddaughter's wedding," she said. After treating the wounds on her legs, Cynthia went to Bruce's room to have another heart-to-heart talk with him. Approaching the boy, she asked, "Bruce, you do realize that if we have to contest the guardianship, Uncle Jonathan will have to give the necessary testimony, don't you?" He looked at her sadly. "Yes, I understand. But tell me, would that really help? Because I don't want to go home. My stepfather will lock me in the basement for what happened. Or worse, he'll call a guard. Uncle Johnny helped me that time. He broke the bars so I could climb out the window. And then we went for a walk together. We went to the park. It was Uncle Johnny who brought me here and said he'd be back soon." At this point, Cynthia suddenly realized that perhaps Johnny could have been hurt by Mr. Jonathan's helpers. After all, if he was connected with crime, what would it take for him to set people up to give the tramp a good beating? Deciding to consult her husband first, Cynthia called to ask how the investigation into Johnny was going. Kevin didn't answer right away. There was a clear irritation in his voice, which was due to the fact that he clearly did not want to talk to Cynthia. "Look, what do you want? You're worried about your tramp. He's alive and well in the prison hospital. He'll get a little sneeze, and then he'll be ready for questioning. I'm sure he'll crack," Kevin said. "It wasn't his fault. I know that for a fact," Cynthia said carefully. Her husband chuckled. "You know, I wonder how you know all this. Are you in bed with him? Maybe he whispered something to you the night you operated on him." Cynthia wrinkled her nose. "No, he didn't whisper anything to me. It's just that you think there's something wrong with the boy. Well, he's fine. And I can say that with confidence to anyone, anywhere." Kevin's voice suddenly sounded suspicious. "Listen, do you know where that boy is? Well, you tell Mr. Jonathan, and he might put you back in the clinic for it. You know he's on good terms with the head doctor. One word from him, and you'll be back in the state. Just tell me, where's that little ragamuffin hiding?" "No, Kevin. I don't think we're going to have this conversation. I'm going to go to the police. And I'd advise your Jonathan to get a good lawyer," Cynthia said. The husband was about to launch into an angry tirade, but he saw that the screen of the smartphone had faded, indicating that she had disconnected the call. "My wife has never done this before. Look how brave she's become. I'll have to tell my mother to rein her in. Look at her. She's completely out of control. She has forgotten who put her in that private clinic for a lot of money," the businessman muttered. Few people knew that in fact Kevin had long been dependent on Mr. Jonathan, who helped him in his business by providing him with some investments to keep him afloat. In return, Kevin had to run all sorts of unpleasant errands. One of these errands was an attempt on the vagrant Johnny, who unwittingly contributed to the escape of his stepson from Jonathan's house. Naturally, Kevin himself did not take part in the attack. He hired people, recently released from prison, to teach the vagrant a lesson. They agreed to do it for a fairly small amount of money. After all, at that time they were in dire need of money. Unfortunately, during the conversation they overreacted, and it came to violence. That's when one of them stabbed Johnny. I guess the conversation didn't work out. Naturally, after the incident, Mr. Jonathan had a big row with Kevin, calling him a fool who couldn't be trusted with anything. Mr. Jonathan was also afraid that Johnny might remember Kevin's helpers and lead the police to them. But Mr. Jonathan controlled his stepson for good reason. He was the main beneficiary of his mother's inheritance. Jonathan had already been a trustee by all the papers, who could not fully dispose of his stepson's money, therefore, and tried to keep the boy in a golden cage, controlling his every move. Of course, Bruce was not a serious danger to Jonathan now, but children grow up fast. What would happen in 5 or 10 years? By then, Jonathan would have raised a dutiful stepson who would give him all his savings when he came of age, and if Bruce grew up to be willful, it would be a complete failure for Jonathan. After talking to her husband, Cynthia was convinced that he was no help, so she decided to spend the night in Mrs. Amanda's outbuilding, and the next morning go to the police. Not alone, but with Bruce, who was to give the necessary evidence while she waited for the morning. The night dragged on like rubber, bringing the inexorable hour of reckoning for Mr. Jonathan and company. What was the surprise of the police when they saw the boy they had been looking for the second day on the doorstep? Bruce smiled sweetly and talked about how he had never been kidnapped. And Uncle Johnny actually helped him. "Look, maybe he's lying about all this," the duty officer asked Cynthia. Cynthia smiled enigmatically. "I don't know. Can you ask him yourself? I think Bruce is telling the truth." "Yes, he is. Uncle Johnny helped me, but my stepfather, Uncle Jonathan, He's really bad. He wouldn't let me go out. So I don't want to go back to him anymore, Bruce said. He also hurt me and probably seems to have poisoned my mum, Bruce stated. The desk clerk shook his head and then called for the head of operations. This is where Cynthia realized she had done the right thing by contacting law enforcement. Soon a special officer was called for the boy, who was able to find a common language with children. And thanks to this, he quite quickly found out from Bruce everything that the investigation needed. On the same day, Mr. Jonathan was arrested. However, the law enforcers did not manage to keep him in custody for long. After all, on the same day the lawyer made a solid bail for him, but this personally Cynthia did not care. After all, she had achieved the most important thing. Now Bruce will no longer live with his stepfather, who faces trial in real term. Having learned about what his wife Cynthia had done, Kevin was really furious. What does she think she's doing? Does she really want to put me in a nunnery? Jonathan would eat me alive for these tricks, he complained to his mother, Mrs. Kimberly. Mrs. Kimberly thought for a moment. Well, if that's the case, son, I think we ought to be on the safe side. You know, you should file for divorce before it's too late. If Jonathan gives you a hard time, you tell him I haven't had a relationship with my wife in a long time. She's not in her right mind, said Mrs. Amanda indignantly. Cynthia hasn't recovered from her dismissal. She does as she pleases. Kevin's eyes twinkled with a sly twinkle. His mother's suggestion certainly appealed to him. And that same day he filed for divorce from Cynthia. Thanks to the testimony of Cynthia and little Bruce, Johnny was cleared of all charges that same day. And homeless Johnny was also transferred to a normal hospital, where he received good care and therapeutic therapy. After Mr. Jonathan's case, the investigation led to the head doctor, Mr. Miles, and the head of the department at the Avicenna Clinic. The couple were now facing criminal penalties that would put an end to their careers as they tried to cover their tracks. Mr. Miles called Cynthia and urged her to come back to work. Except she didn't want to. Instead, she returned to the very city hospital where her career began. There she was able to nurse Johnny, chatting with him about everything in the world. Also, without too much trouble, she was able to arrange with the superintendent for Mrs. Amanda to be placed in one of the wards for intensive therapy. Luckily, this had paid off and her grandmother was slowly on the mend. Cynthia, on the other hand, had a divorce ahead of her, which was arranged by her husband Kevin. The thing was that Kevin decided to leave Cynthia without a house, which was purchased with their joint money. Not only that, in fact, she gave a large sum of money from her own pocket to pay off the mortgage, but Kevin had tactfully kept quiet about it. What was the businessman's surprise when in court he saw next to Cynthia little Bruce and Johnny, who had been discharged from the hospital and was now going to stand up to the end for his saviors. Even a good family law attorney didn't help Kevin that day. In fact, when the boy Bruce told of how and what Cynthia had helped him with, everyone present could not hold back the tears. It was only now that the true extent of Mr. Jonathan and Kevin's scam became clear. Without knowing it himself, the husband had awakened forces that affected not only the boss, but himself as well. Soon all of his associates who had attempted to murder Johnny were apprehended under the pressure of irrefutable evidence. They testified, and Kevin went straight from the courtroom in the divorce case to the detention center. Cynthia, on the other hand, left the court as a winner. Johnny was on her left hand and Bruce on her right. They were met outside by Mrs. Amanda and little Elizabeth, who was holding a bunch of wild flowers. Cynthia smiled and caught herself thinking that it had been a long time since she had felt as good as she did now. That afternoon they had taken many walks and enjoyed what each other had. They had also talked with Johnny about what day they would choose to have their wedding. In the end, they agreed that they would have the wedding on Bruce's mother's birthday, thus giving the baby a kind of gift. After a noisy celebration, Cynthia and Johnny adopted both Bruce and Elizabeth as guardians. The whole family, along with grandmother Mrs. Amanda, moved into Bruce's mother's house. Johnny took a driving course and got his license and became a taxi driver. Bruce and Elizabeth go to school together. Alana turned off the bedroom light. Time to go to bed, she thought. Tomorrow would be a day off, so she could stay in bed longer. But it was almost 1 o'clock in the morning and her eyes were getting sleepy. I can't wait to get under the covers. In her head flashed only one thought. The woman watched her favorite TV series, and here she could not tear herself away. There was everything: love, betrayal, and a difficult period in the main character. All this was so reminiscent of the fate of Alana. The series, as it should, ended with a happy ending. It was clear from the very beginning. In such movies, it could not be otherwise. And in Alana's life, anything could happen. However, the circumstances were such that now she is doing well. I can't believe it sometimes. How great it all turned out in the end. She smiled at the thought that Alana's life was as if it had been scripted by the director of all those TV shows. It all started many years ago, and at the start of her life, young Alana was faced with a lot of adversity and loss. Her childhood came in memories only vaguely. Only sensations and images remained in her memory. Her father, strong and reliable, often carried her daughter on his strong shoulders. The girl adored these moments. And fun, and a little scary to look at the world from such a height, thought Alana, feeling the support of her father's hands. Her mom was like a warm hug, kisses, with a gentle voice, her face so high it was lost in a haze. Alana couldn't remember mom's features. They were blurring and slipping away. But amazingly, for some reason, Alana could still clearly see her mother's dress in front of her, turquoise with small black polka dots. And then her parents were gone. Everything happened suddenly. A fire in the dormitory, caused by a cigarette butt left on the sofa, took the lives of young students. Luckily, Alana stayed at a 24-hour daycare center that night. She remembered longing for her family. First she cried, then she was angry at her mom and dad. Why don't they come? Why don't they pick me up like they used to? The nanny, as best she could, tried to explain to the 3-year-old girl what had happened. What had happened? Alana was very small then, but she still remembered her feelings: fear, despair, and for some reason rage. The girl was about to be sent to an orphanage, and the paperwork was already being processed when her Aunt Alex, her father's sister, suddenly showed up. Alex lived in the village, single-handedly raising 2 daughters, and she didn't really need Alana. Brother and sister did not communicate much, but relatives of Alan's father persuaded Alex, saying that it would be wrong if the girl would grow up in an orphanage when her aunt was alive. As a result, Alex's aunt, for whom the opinion of people was very important, sheltered her niece. Alanino's childhood was not a happy one. Aunt Alex was not happy about the extra mouth, but she fulfilled her duties, dressed, fed, and brought up Alana. She sent her niece to school on time, kept her busy, and taught her household skills. But the aunt's attitude toward her own daughters was different. She looked at them with love and tenderness, bought sweets for them with her last money, and dressed them up in clean dresses. Alanina's wishes were not taken into account. She received old clothes, after her cousins. When they fidgeted in front of the mirror, her aunt smiled, calling them beauties and photo models. Alana, trying to get approval, did the same, but heard in her address a completely different assessment. That's the same monkey screams. All in the mother went, would not have been a case to do. So trying to be inconspicuous and not to attract attention to herself, Alana became more and more withdrawn. To prove to Alex that she had not taken her niece in vain, and that she could be of use to her, became an urgent task for Alana. From an early age, she realized that no one would love her just for her pretty eyes. Recognition and respect had to be earned. Dreaming of independence, after finishing 9 grades of village school, Alana decided that it was time to act. She applied to the college, as continuing her school education and entering a university seemed something impossible. You need to get a profession as soon as possible and become independent, Aunt Alex reasoned, frankly expressing the idea that university was not an option for Alana. Once you get a specialty, you'll start earning your own money, Auntie persuaded, not hiding her thoughts that it was time for Alana to think about a future outside the village. The phrase "you're a hula face" had been said to her, but despite that, Alana felt she had grown up to be a pretty girl. She saw her reflection and noticed traits in herself that set her apart from her cousins. Alana realized more and more how much she resembled her mother, who had also grown up in an orphanage. Alana knew little about her maternal relatives, but she thought that perhaps they would have accepted her differently, better than Aunt Alex. Modest and quiet, Alana did not spend her evenings with boys or go dancing, but she still found admirers in the village. By the age of 16, she was being courted by local boys, which was a surprise to the girl and perhaps proof that she had something special that attracted attention to her. Alana decided that before building a personal life, she wanted to achieve professional independence and feel more confident in her own abilities. She did not seek an early marriage, for she had dreams of a strong family and a loving husband, and she realized that to realize these dreams, she had to become independent first. After high school, Alana went to the city and soon began to live an independent life. She was full of ambition and desire to achieve independence. City life seemed confusing to her at first, but over time Alana adapted to it, rejoicing in her relative independence from her aunt. At the age of 20, Alana proudly received a degree in food technologist, but soon faced the realities of adult life when she realized that without work experience it would be difficult to find a job in her specialty. After graduation, the state support stopped, and the girl had to look for any job to support herself. Alana started looking for work actively, not neglecting even low-skilled jobs, such as a cleaner in the housing and utilities department, because she had to survive somehow. The job was hard and poorly paid, but the offer of a room under the stairs was a lifeline, even though it only provided her with shelter and a minimal means of subsistence. Nevertheless, Alana didn't give up, continuing to look for a better job where she could use her knowledge and get paid accordingly. She went to many interviews, carefully presenting her red diploma to potential employers, but to no avail until one day she was lucky. Alana came to one interview at a beverage company with the hope that she would finally be able to start a career in her profession and prove to herself and everyone around her that she could break the stereotype of a young professional with no experience and succeed. She saw a vacancy in the newspaper and decided to try her luck. Already in the first minutes of the interview, the girl realized that she would not be taken. The employee of the personnel department, it seemed, communicated with Alana for a tick. Maybe she was fulfilling some recruitment plan or creating the appearance of work. I immediately guessed that she wouldn't be hired here as a technologist. And then he entered the office, Kevin, a tall man in jeans and a plain black t-shirt under which I could see strong muscles. You could tell he played some kind of sport or went to a gym. He had a sense of strength and self-confidence. He looked like a Hollywood actor, slightly mocking eyes, white teeth, a smile, charming dimples on his cheeks. The man was about 15 years older than Yana. The girl, without wanting to, looked at him. Then she realized and looked away. It was not enough that he noticed her involuntary admiration. He'd think she was a fool. But Kevin noticed. He winked cheerfully at Alana and turned to the human resources lady. "Who's this young, lovely creature who's applying for the technologist position? But she's not a good fit. She has no experience at all, and her specialty is not the same." "It's hard to find a job for young people without experience." The man shook his head, looking at Alana with interest. "It's hard for them. What about the secretary position?" "I need a new assistant right now. She's young, quick, energetic, and she's got the right looks, which is important for our image. We wanted to transfer a technician to this place from the energy department," reminded the personnel officer. "Let's put the girl on probation." "Something tells me she can handle it," Kevin said, winking at Alana. He grabbed a file from his desk and left the office. Without expecting it, Alana had become a secretary. The job was not difficult, and the girl was quickly brought up to speed. She was required to answer the phone and record messages for the boss when he was absent from work. Also, Alana had to prepare coffee for Kevin's visitors and treat them while they were waiting for their turn in the reception area. The salary offered to the girl was such that she couldn't even believe her luck. With this money, she could rent a nice apartment, eat well, and buy herself nice outfits. She could even save a little every month. But all of this kept Alana's mind at ease. Her new responsibilities, her co-workers, and the chic surroundings of the reception area where she worked now were very different from the dirty driveway cleaning she'd been doing recently. But Alana enjoyed her interactions with Kevin. He turned out to be very kind, understanding, and fun. Her boss treated her well, praised her performance, complimented her, and discussed work issues. Alana didn't notice how she fell in love. It was probably her first and immediately strong love. She couldn't imagine life without this man. The object of her secret love was Kevin, of course. But Alana knew he was married to the beautiful and intelligent Cynthia and had 3 wonderful sons. Trying to condemn herself for these feelings, she couldn't escape her sincere emotions. But she realized that this situation had no future. She shouldn't be a nuisance in someone else's family. After convincing herself over the weekend, Alana decided to end her reverie. Over the weekend, Alana got used to the idea that there was nothing she and the chief could have in common. But on Monday, once again seeing his smile and eyes with a sly squint, the girl again ceased to control herself. She was daydreaming for real. She wanted Kevin to hug her, to kiss her, to hold her close. Alana would be the happiest person in the world. One evening, Kevin invited Alana into his office. It was late. The co-workers had dispersed. The boss was preparing for an upcoming audit and stayed late to look over the reports. Alana was required by regulation to stay in her office as long as the boss was at work. Kevin rarely stayed late, once every couple or 3 months at most. That's when he did too. "Alana, I need to talk to you straight," the man began as Alana sat down in the visitor's chair. The girl tensed up. Maybe the chief had some complaints about her work. Suddenly he would offer her to write a letter of resignation. Where else would she find such a job? "We've had you for 6 months. You're a good girl, you're a good worker. But I realized not too long ago that it's not just those qualities that attract me to you," Kevin continued, looking Alana straight in the eye and speaking in a quiet, calm voice. Thinking about what had happened, Alana was already feeling a little dizzy. Her heart was pounding frantically in her chest and a chill appeared in her stomach, just like before exams. "I think you have some feelings for me too." "I'm right," Kevin said, looking at Alana point blank and waiting for an answer. How could the girl deny the obvious? Yes, of course she did. She'd been in love with the chief for a long time, tried not to show her feelings, thought she was succeeding well. But no, Kevin, it turns out, understood everything. Later, many years later, Alana looked at the situation with different eyes. Kevin had pressured her, creating the illusion of a choice, even though the decision had been determined in advance. Kevin is a rich, powerful man, handsome, mature, successful. She is a young girl, completely dependent on him. Kevin clearly understood how important the job and the paycheck were to Alana. He skillfully manipulated young girls, making them lose their heads to him. However, the realization of all this came much later. In those days, it seemed that fate generously rewarded her. The girl couldn't even believe her luck. Kevin paying attention to her was unbelievable. She loved him and was willing to do anything for him. "Yes, you're right. I have feelings for you too," Alana admitted, blushing. She herself didn't understand why she suddenly felt so vulnerable. "Then I'm not wrong," the man smiled. "Let's make a deal first. Let's stop replacing each other. Second, I really want to spend more time with you. So I suggest right now we have dinner at a restaurant somewhere. How about it?" Alana shrugged. She wasn't yet used to the idea of Kevin himself proposing a relationship to her. It seemed unbelievable. At that moment, the girl had completely forgotten about her boss's wife and his 3 sons. It all seemed unimportant. The main thing was Kevin, who looked at her with tenderness and admiration, smiled and invited her to dinner. "I'm probably not dressed for a restaurant," Alana finally said. There was no dress code in the company. Everyone wore what they wanted to wear. On this day, Alana came to work in jeans and a t-shirt. If she had known in advance, she would have worn one of her favorite dresses, which she now had plenty of thanks to her good salary. Alana, Victor smiled. "You don't understand anything, and you don't even realize how gorgeous you look in those jeans of yours." "It's just adorable," Kevin said with a smile. They did go to a restaurant that evening. It was the first time Alana had been in the cabin of the chief's expensive foreign car, and it was the first time she had been to a restaurant too. The girl felt a little confused at first. She didn't know how to behave and what to say. She was afraid of looking rude and ignorant in front of Victor. But gradually the man did the seemingly impossible with his jokes and compliments. He dispelled her stiffness. She did not notice how she began to communicate with him simply and sincerely. Kevin wanted to know everything about her, and she told him everything about her cold childhood, about her difficult years of study and her work as a janitor. Kevin looked at her seriously and silently, without interrupting, catching every word she said.
"Yeah, you've had a hard life," he said when Alana was done. "Life hasn't spoiled you, but you're with me now, and things will be different." Alana smiled. She believed this strong, powerful man unconditionally. Finally, she felt secure and unfamiliar, but so pleasant feeling. Later, they kissed for a long time in Kevin's car. Alana was dizzy from his embrace and kisses, loving his warmth and touch and responding eagerly. But suddenly, Kevin said it was time to leave. He drove her home and kissed her gently on the cheek goodbye. "You don't look good here," he looked around, surveying his surroundings. "We'll figure something out." From then on, their story began. At work, they didn't advertise their relationship, although Kevin could occasionally smile, especially at Alana in front of all the co-workers, and even compliment her. Soon it was known to everyone. It was making Alana a little tense, but no one said anything to her face. People valued their places and held on to them. Probably that's why no one wanted to ruin the relationship with the chief. Before Alana knew it, Kevin had become everything to her. She didn't need anyone else, just to be near him. To hear his voice, to inhale the scent of her favorite person, to feel the beating of his heart. Alana was ready to dissolve in him, to do for him everything he wanted. When they didn't see each other for a long time, it happened occasionally. Kevin would go on a long business trip or go on vacation with his family. Alana couldn't eat anything. She melted before her eyes and stopped caring about anything. Books were not read, TV series were not watched. The girl counted the days and even hours until she met her beloved. It was like an addiction. Kevin patronized Alana. He liked to surprise and please her. The man was not stingy with gifts, expensive jewelry, brand-name clothes, shoes, certificates to spas. Every time he came up with something new. Kevin rented a luxurious apartment for Alana in the city center, spacious, bright, stylishly furnished. Sometimes he stayed overnight, and in those moments Alana felt especially happy. She imagined they were husband and wife. She didn't have to share him with anyone. And she didn't have to hide either. One thing marred the happiness: Kevin had a family, and that fact was impossible to ignore. The man, without noticing it himself, often told Alana something about his children or his spouse. They were mostly funny and sweet stories. The man loved his boys and had great respect for his wife. Did he love her? Alana couldn't answer that question for herself, and Kevin didn't dare ask. No, they often talked about frank topics, but here Alana was afraid to hear a positive answer. What if Kevin really loved his wife? And she, Alana? Just a passing fancy. And yet Alana felt that Kevin took her very seriously. He may have planned a brief affair with the young secretary at the beginning of the relationship, but then it turned out that they were very good together. Despite the difference in age and social status, "You understand me like no one else," Kevin confessed more than once, looking at Alana. "I feel so good with you, and so relaxed, my soul rests." It's such an amazing feeling to realize that there's someone who accepts you with all your strengths and weaknesses. Kevin was right. Alana did love him with some kind of unconditional love. Even if Kevin had committed some horrible act or crime, it wouldn't have changed Alana's attitude towards him. 10 years flew by unnoticed. Alana and Kevin grew closer during that time. They occasionally flew together on vacations. Kevin would make out a business trip at work and take Alana with him. Those were wonderful days: the sea, the beaches, the incredible beauty of nature. And it was just the two of them, with no other eyes and ears. Alana wondered more than once if Kevin knew that her husband had a mistress for a long time. It was unlikely that she was still in the dark. The woman didn't seem naive or stupid. One day, Alana dared to ask Kevin about it. "Don't worry," he smiled, stroking Alana's hair. "She and I have a loose relationship. We don't stress each other with jealousy and control. Cynthia, just like me, is free to do whatever she wants." Alana couldn't understand it. She explained to herself that this relationship between the couple was not a marriage of love, but of convenience. Kevin and Cynthia's parents were big businessmen who had decided to pool their capital and invest it in their children. There wasn't much love between the couple. Alana liked to think so. It was somehow comforting and gave her hope that when Kevin's children grew up and became independent, he could finally divorce his wife to make her, Alana, his lawfully wedded wife. Alana was no longer the young, inexperienced 20-year-old secretary who had agreed to have an affair with her boss. She was well into her 30s, but she was still naive, perhaps even worldly stupid. It seemed to her, though, that sooner or later Kevin would marry her. 2 more years passed, and then one morning Alana realized she couldn't get out of bed. She felt sick, nausea rising to her throat at the slightest movement. At that moment, the woman guessed that a miracle had happened. It looked like she was expecting a baby. Despite the fact that she and Kevin were very careful, no method of contraception gives 100% results. And here's the result. Despite not feeling well, Alana suddenly felt happy. Her soul felt warm and clear. She still got out of bed and got to the pharmacy where she bought the test. Alana was afraid that she was wrong, but the test did not disappoint. 2 bright stripes showed that she had a baby under her heart. Before talking to Kevin, Alana was hardly worried at all. Yes, he'd said more than once that he didn't want any more children, but she didn't think Kevin wouldn't be happy when he found out about the baby. He loved her so much, cared for her so tenderly, showered her with compliments and gifts. Wouldn't he be happy to hear that they were going to have a baby soon? Alana has been dreaming of a baby for so long, envying moms with strollers. And now she's going to have a baby too. Finally, a son or a daughter, whatever. Kevin, however, frowned when he heard the news. "Alana, we had a deal." There was an accusing tone in his voice. "I don't know how it happened," Alana said, surprised at herself. She had already realized that Kevin was not happy about the baby, but she was still hoping to change his mind. She wanted him to share her joy and excitement, to tell her that everything would be all right. But it wasn't. Kevin stood his ground. He didn't want a child, and the only way out was to terminate the pregnancy. Children out of wedlock were out of the question. Alana cried, begged Kevin to come to his senses, and for the first time in their 12-year relationship, she was angry with him. How dare he suggest she get rid of her long-awaited, wanted child? "I love you, I love what we have. But the baby doesn't. I have a right to decide that too." "No, you don't." Alana slammed the door and stormed out of the apartment Kevin had rented for her. She ran out into the night, wherever she could see. The woman wasn't afraid to stay on the street. She had a cell phone and had accumulated a small fortune over the years. She and her child would have enough for the first time, and then Alana would find a job and things would get better. "I won't betray you, my little one," Alana said to her daughter. Yes, to her daughter. Alana realized what was waiting for the girl the moment she ran away from home. Alana quit her job at Kevin's company and rented a small apartment on the outskirts of town where rent was cheaper. Kevin called often, but every time she answered, she thought he'd come to his senses. But no, he was still insistent he wanted Alana back, but he was urging her to get rid of the baby. Alana was nervous, under tremendous stress every day. She dreaded the future. She couldn't find a job and now had no one to lean on. Alana had grown accustomed to Kevin, to his sensitivity, attention, tenderness, support. He playfully solved all the problems that arose and with a few words lifted Alana's mood. And now Kevin had become alien and inaccessible. Alana felt their connection breaking, and it was almost physically painful. Sometimes she even thought about doing what Kevin wanted her to do, get rid of the baby and go back to her old life. But those thoughts quickly faded. No, Alana would have this baby, give birth to it, and raise it. She could handle it. She had wanted to be a mother for so long. However, despite Alana's best efforts, she was unable to keep the pregnancy going. Worries, constant stress, and nerves, all this together led to a tragic result. Alana curled up right on the street. The pain was such that her eyes went black. She thought she was going to faint. Someone called an ambulance. Alana was taken away from the store, on whose porch she was curled up in pain. The woman was ready to endure any agony as long as her baby was saved. But something told her that nothing would work. There was still hope, but it was very weak and ghostly. In the hospital, on a cold couch, indifferent eyes of doctors, and a voice that said terrible words for Alana clean. There's nothing left to save. Then Alana lay in a room surrounded by other women who were still pregnant. The doctors had saved their babies, and being among themselves, the expectant mothers discussed their babies. Each of them was sure that all threats were over and their babies would be born. Alana, on the other hand, was no longer hopeful. At the first round, the doctor shocked Alana with the news. He told her that she would probably never become a mother again. "Your case is complicated. This was about saving your life. You should know that it is unlikely you will be able to have a natural birth." But the doctors added that there are options, as medicine does not stand still. Alana didn't listen. Further, she fell into the abyss of despair and fear. Was her biggest dream not going to come true? Would no one ever call her mom? What was there to live for? Kevin met Alana at the hospital. How did he know what had happened? Alana was surprised, but not really surprised. She didn't feel much at all at that moment. She was going to go to the apartment she'd rented, but Kevin had taken her home, to the place where she'd lived for years, and was happy. "Stop fooling around," Kevin said. "Get back here. We'd already made a mess of things." Alana didn't care. It took her a long time to come back to life. At first she even ate, but only because Kevin forced her to. She wanted nothing more than a couch and a pillow. Alana blamed herself for not keeping the baby safe. Kevin carried some of the blame too. At first she thought it was his fault. But he had tried so hard. Kevin had turned into a sensitive and considerate man again. He cooked her favorite meals for Alana, watched TV shows with her, cared as much as he could. It was very touching. Kevin seemed genuinely sorry for what had happened. I reevaluated the situation and realized that I was being selfish. "I'm sorry, let's start over. This time I'll be more attentive to your wants and needs. The doctors said you were between life and death. It's scary to think that I might have lost you." Gradually, Alana melted away. She accepted the current state of affairs. After all, the world wasn't about children. Many people nowadays consciously choose childlessness. Besides, she had a loving and sensitive man by her side. And Alana decided to stay happy, no matter what. And it worked. Kevin and Alana began to travel more. For the next 2 years, they traveled almost all over the world. They climbed mountains, bobbed on ocean waves, crossed the desert in jeeps. It was thrilling, exciting, and wonderful. The main thing is that Kevin was always there for us, protecting us, supporting us. His children were grown. They didn't need their father, and Cynthia hardly required his presence. Kevin spent more time with Alana, and she was delighted. But as time went on, things began to change. At first it was subtle, but then it became more and more noticeable. Kevin was suddenly incredibly busy, always working late, traveling for business, and when he was with Alana, he was in his own thoughts. He didn't compliment her anymore. He didn't ask her about the past day or share the events of his life. Alana panicked. She was used to having Kevin around, and it seemed to her that it would always be that way. They had been through so much together, but now something strange and frightening was happening. Kevin was clearly drifting away, and the process was gaining momentum. Alana hesitated to talk about it. She was no longer a naive girl, but her insecurities remained. Outwardly, Alana looked like a successful and contented woman, but it was only an appearance. She was afraid to hear honest answers to her questions, which could redefine her life. That's why she kept quiet. Kevin himself had once dared to have a serious conversation. That evening was forever etched in Alana's memory. Kevin arrived late when she was about to go to bed. Alana was glad because she missed him very much. She missed the companionship, the jokes, and even the funny jabs. Maybe it wasn't all that bad if Kevin was here. Maybe Alana was just getting herself worked up. "Alana, this may be hard to accept right off the bat, but we need to break up." Alana felt like she'd been hit over the head. She fluttered her eyelashes and turned pale, and Kevin hastily pulled up a chair for her, afraid she would faint. Then the man talked at length about how happy he'd been with Alana for nearly a decade and a half, describing her virtues and assuring her that she had more to come. He explained that the relationship had simply exhausted itself. There was no longer that spark, passion, emotion. "The same thing is happening to you." "I can see it," Kevin said, but Alana thought he was wrong. It was incomprehensible to her. Kevin probably thought it was easier to believe that Alana's feelings had cooled too. Kevin talked a lot and persuasively, as he always did. Alana listened, sometimes nodding, answering something. She didn't cry, she didn't beg, she didn't argue. It was useless. Kevin had decided everything for the two of them. You could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice, read it in every gesture. "I met someone else, and I had strong feelings for her. I didn't expect that to happen in my old age," Kevin admitted. Alana didn't cry, but she was dying inside. She realized that the old Alana was gone. Kevin was everything to her. She had no idea how to live without him, but he had made his choice, and nothing could stop it. The man couldn't hide a smile while talking about his new love. This is something incredible. Alana, you're going to have to leave my company. You're just going to quit. She'll be working here now. And you and I can't see each other all the time. It's going to be hard on both of you, and on me, of course. Alana nodded, barely holding back tears. I feel so bad about all this, Alana thought. It's going to be okay, Alana smiled, trying not to show how hard it was for her. She didn't want Kevin to feel sorry for her. Just not this. I'm sorry for what happened, but I've been honest with you. This is all very hard. I'll help you find another job. And you can stay in the apartment as long as you want until you find a new one, Kevin added. Thank you, Alana nodded. That was it. Alana's past life was over. She wouldn't stay in the apartment that held so many happy moments. The woman left for another city where nothing would remind her of Kevin. And it wasn't easy. They lived together for almost 15 years. And Alana got used to Kevin, to the joint life with him, thought it would last forever. But everything changed in an instant. Alana found an apartment in a new city thanks to her savings and started looking for a job. She faced a hard truth: it was not so easy to find a job in her specialty. Almost 15 years of working as a secretary did not give her a chance, because there were few suitable vacancies, and she could not do anything else really well. So Alana became a kitchen assistant at a local restaurant. Her job duties ranged from making sure the floors were clean to washing dishes and carrying pots. She did whatever was asked of her. Alana was always ready to work. The work was hard, and at the end of the day, her back ached and her legs rang. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough to rent a small apartment. And of course, there was a nice bonus of taking home leftovers at the end of the day. For Yana, with her limited budget, this was really valuable. Did she miss her former life, a comfortable apartment, traveling, shopping in expensive stores? Probably not. Of course she was sad, but not for the lost prosperity that Kevin had provided. She missed Kevin himself, despite the way things had ended. Alana still loved him so much that even the thought of other men seemed impossible to her. Her friends advised her to get on with her personal life, but her heart wouldn't listen. Sometimes Alana imagined that something would happen to Kevin, that he would lose everything: money, business, house. Naturally, his new girlfriend would immediately leave him. Alana believed she was only with him for the money. As for Kevin's wife, Cynthia, she apparently didn't care about his adventures. Alana, unlike her, would forgive Victor anything and gladly take him back. But those were just fantasies, she was well aware of that. Time passed, and Alana's mental wounds healed, turning into scars. She lived alone, almost reaching her 40s, without children, without a husband, without a profession to be proud of. The absence of a loved one to care for, and who would care for her, was hard on Alana. The loneliness frightened her. Could she fall in love with someone else? There were no suitable candidates in her surroundings. After everything with Kevin, Alana realized that true love existed, and she could no longer settle for anything less. Alana couldn't bring herself to get over the separation. There were new joys in her life books. She became a frequent visitor to the local library. Alana absorbed the works, got acquainted with the inner world of the classics, and through the prism of events in their novels and stories, she rethought her fate. In her school years, Alana did not pay much attention to literature. All these works seemed boring to her, and she did not understand half of the words. However, apparently now it was the right moment for reading. In addition, Alana had a cat, Naomi, who turned out to be a very intelligent and affectionate animal. When Alana came home sad, Naomi would start rubbing against her legs, as if trying to comfort her. And when the mistress felt tired, the cat became inaudible and unnoticeable. One cold fall evening, Alana prepared a delicious dinner for Naomi from leftover red fish and beef scraps. She took something from the table for herself, too. I wondered how much food was left over after working in the kitchen. It turned out to be a decent savings on food. Alana buttoned her jacket up to her chin and pulled her hat over her ears. She didn't feel like going outside. The wind was making the windows shake, and it looked like it was going to rain. But staying at work overnight wasn't an option. Naomi, her favorite book, and the soft couch were waiting for her at home. It was cozy and warm, though very lonely. It wasn't that far to walk, only a couple of blocks. Alana had chosen an apartment near the restaurant, saving not only on food but also on transportation. It was already dark outside. The evening was almost pitch black. It felt like winter was approaching. Soon the snow would fall, and the streets would become bright and colorful, and the New Year mood would appear. But so far it was dirty and slushy, uncomfortable. In such weather I wanted to be home sooner. The streets were deserted. No wonder, because the cold, nasty rain had started. The icy wind burned my cheeks. As she passed the playground, which in the darkness looked like the set of a horror movie, Alana hurried home. When she heard that voice, a weak, trembling voice that sounded desperate, "Help, please. I'm hungry," Alana stopped. It was very unexpected to hear a voice clearly belonging to a small child on the street in this weather. There were no adults around, and Alana didn't see the owner of the thin voice either. "Can you help?" a girl came out of the cabin of the wooden-colored ship that stood proudly in the playground. A little girl altogether. She looked no more than 5 years old, huge, frightened brown eyes, plump lips, beautifully arched eyebrows. Tangled strands of brown hair were poking out from under a stretched cap. The girl was wearing a gray boy's jacket, which was 2 sizes too big for her. On her feet she wore sneakers that were worn almost to the ground. All indications were that she came from a poor family. If she had a family at all, she probably should. Children don't happen by themselves or grow up in an orphanage, or close adults raise them. The girl looked at Alana studyingly, as if trying to figure out whether she was friend or foe. What are you doing here?" Alana finally said. "Sitting, walking down the street." Suddenly it started raining and the wind picked up, so I hid here. Where are your parents?" "My mom died and my dad disappeared somewhere. First we took a long train ride with him. The train was great, it was warm, the bed was clean, there was plenty of food. We were going to Grandma's, that's what Dad said. And then we got off the train. Daddy told him to wait for him and left, so I went to look for him. Only he was nowhere to be found." "Why did you leave? Daddy must have come back for you, but he didn't find you. Now he's worried, running around looking for his daughter." I waited a long time. The little girl shook her head. "We got here this morning. I had already left the station at night when it got dark." That did seem strange. Alana could understand if the man had left his daughter for a few minutes to, I don't know, go to the bathroom or drop off things at the luggage room. But according to the girl, she waited for her parent all day. "He left me." I guess the little girl sighed. "Daddy doesn't love me. It's Mom loved, but she died already. And Daddy, I heard him tell a friend of his that I was a burden to him." "So what are we going to do with you now?" Alana didn't know what to do. Leaving the girl out here in the cold wasn't an option. That was for sure. Dragging the child to the police wasn't an option either. The baby needed a good dinner and a warm bed right now. She'd have to sit on some chair all night at the station while they drew up a report, while they figured out where to put her, while they called the guardian or whoever they called in such cases. "Let's go to my place now," Alana finally decided. "We'll eat, watch TV. I have a cat, you can play with it. And tomorrow we'll go to the police. And the police uncles will decide what to do with you." "The police?" The girl immediately tensed up. "You don't have to go to the police. I haven't done anything wrong." Alana realized that the little girl was afraid of policemen for something. Most likely she had transferred such an attitude to law enforcement representatives from her parents. Perhaps they were doing something criminal. It's very likely. Normal people don't put their children in this situation. "The cops are kind and good," Alana reassured the little girl. "We'll ask them to find your daddy." "Okay." Yes, the little girl nodded and added, "I'm really hungry. Auntie, do you have any sausage at home?" Alana's heart clenched with pity for this hungry, abandoned child. Somehow she reminded her of herself as a child, needed by no one, forgotten and abandoned by everyone. Alana held out her hand to the girl, who smiled and clung to it happily. Along the way, Alana and the girl got to know each other. She knew her name Emma, but she couldn't say her last name. That was strange for a rather small child of 5. Emma told a little about her life. At first, the little girl lived with her mom and dad somewhere in a village or on the outskirts of a small town. Her parents apparently drank. Emma mentioned noisy companies, fights, people falling asleep on the floor. including complete strangers. And in all of this, a small, defenseless child was growing up. Listening to Emma, Alana thought about how lucky she was to be in her aunt's family as a child. And she wasn't exactly loved and certainly not spoiled, but she'd never witnessed a scene like Emma's, either. Emma was taken to work almost every day. As Alana understood it, her parents would take her to the center of a small town and leave her at a crosswalk to beg for alms. Emma was given a lot. Of course they did for such a doll. Brown eyes alone. In general, Emma had a hint of oriental blood-dark skin, coal black eyelashes and eyebrows. She looked like a beautiful, expensive doll. And she was not cherished, not appreciated. Emma should go to kindergarten, wear smart dresses, play with her friends. She is so energetic, smart, curious. But the girl had to spend her days in a dark underpass and beg for change from passers-by. "Didn't they hurt you there?" Alana asked. "Little could happen on the street to a small child?" No, Emma shook her head. "Everyone knew me in the crosswalk already, my uncle, the guitar player, and my aunt. She sold knitted socks in the crosswalk. And my dad often came to check up on me." In the evening, Emma's family returned home and went on as circumstances dictated. Sometimes Emma was left alone for a few days in an empty house. Her parents went out with someone. Other times, the company would gather at their place. Emma didn't know any other life, so she talked about everything that happened to her easily and casually. It was the norm for her. Meanwhile, Alana's hair was standing on her head in horror. What a lot of things had befallen a small child. And then Mommy died. Emma sighed. Daddy said it was bad vodka. And God saved him. He'd fallen asleep before that bottle was opened, so he survived. But Mom didn't sleep. So her friends got poisoned. Emma missed her mother very much. According to the girl, her parent loved her, treated her with candy, called her a beautiful princess, made beautiful ponytails. But sometimes she beat her, of course. It usually happened on days when Emma wasn't served enough. But if they served a lot, kissed and hugged, sang songs to her daughter and looked at her with kind eyes. Daddy's not like that. He never hugged me, and he never sang songs to me, and he never told me fairy tales. He doesn't love me, but still he's my daddy, and he takes care of me. Now he's lost or left me because he doesn't need me. They finally made it to Alana's apartment. "You come on in, don't be shy. See, Naomi's meeting us, already missed you." Emma seemed to be in a normal apartment for the first time. Everything here seemed unusual, strange and wonderful to her. Simple things made the little girl really excited. Like the lamp on the wall or the toaster or the bathroom. Alana immediately filled it to the brim with warm water to wash the girl. Everything. Alana wrapped Emma in her robe and carried her little guest into the kitchen. Dinner from an expensive restaurant was already waiting for her. Here, grilled vegetables, chicken kebab, fruit. At the sight of this variety, Emma was even confused. "Is this something you can eat?" "For me," she asked. You, Alana smiled. "You should try it. It's really good." Emma greedily pounced on the food. It was immediately apparent that the little girl had been starved. And then Alana put Emma to bed in a makeshift bed made from 2 upholstered armchairs. She didn't have a second bed in the apartment. "I love it so much at your place," the sleepy little girl admitted. "May my daddy never be found at all. I want to stay with you." These words echoed warmly in Alana's heart. She was pleased that Emma liked it at her place. On the other hand, one should never get attached to the little girl. She'd have to go to the police with her tomorrow anyway. That's a shame. What a pleasure it is to take care of a child, to see its happy eyes, to open the world to it. I can't tell you how it feels. Even if only for one evening, but Alana felt like a mother of a wonderful girl. In the morning, she had to dress up the baby in her old dirty clothes. There were no other clothes. Alana asked for time off work and explained the situation. They were sympathetic and gave her advice on how to talk to the police so that they would not think that a kind woman had taken someone else's child. Alana was surprised. She had never even thought of such a possibility. At the station, Alana went to the duty officer and told him her story. He, surprised, looked at the 2 visitors with his eyes and called someone. Then he called the number of the office and let the woman with the child behind the desk. The young man in shoulder straps listened to her, then asked Emma a few questions before writing down Alana's details and suggesting she go home. What about the girl? Alana was no longer indifferent to Emma's fate, especially since the girl clung so trustingly to her hand. How is it to go and leave her here with strangers? The little girl's been through enough. Can I take her? I promise I'll be in touch with you 24 hours a day, and I'll take the baby anywhere at the slightest need. The policeman shook his head negatively. You could see in his eyes that he'd love to help Alana and Emma, but he wasn't supposed to. I want to take her away. The words came out of Alana's mouth before she could think. To adopt her. If her parents can't be found, I'll take custody of the child, temporary, permanent, whatever, just so long as she's with me. Are you sure? The policeman looked at Alana in surprise. More than sure. I don't want her in an orphanage or hospital. Let her go through all the necessary procedures at my place. I'll sign everything that needs to be signed. Certificates will be provided. We'll keep that in mind. The policeman nodded and made some notes on the report. But Emma still had to spend about a month with strangers. First, she was admitted to the hospital in what was called the quarantine block. There, the girl was examined from top to bottom. It turned out that her health was excellent. Then Emma went to the orphanage. Alana visited the little girl almost every day. When Emma saw her, she would rush to her and hug her tightly. It was such a sweet moment. Alana always brought her some sweets or interesting toys. It was a joy to see the child's eyes light up with joy. All this time, Alana was preparing the documents for the adoption of the girl, collecting the necessary certificates, visiting the school of foster parents. She could not imagine that Emma would live with someone else. And the girl herself was drawn to Alana with all her soul. It's a pity that a 5-year-old's opinion won't be taken into account in court. If only she were 10. The search for Emma's father was not progressing. The orientation letters, interviews with possible witnesses, posters on the poles, and TV stories did not give any results. Emma's parents seemed to have fallen through the cracks. Alana was inclined to think that the little girl was right. The father had really abandoned his daughter, just left her at the train station in a strange city. A great plan if you want to never be found. Alana's adoption was going to be a problem. Single woman, no place of her own, low paycheck. Everything was looking up for Emma to be sent to an orphanage. Angry children, angry teachers of state rank. Alana could not imagine Emma, tender little Emma, in such conditions. Sure, the little girl had been through a lot in her 5 years, but she still had parents who took care of her as best they could. Yes, Alana realized that no one would really appreciate and love the girl in the orphanage. Her colleagues advised her to hire a lawyer specializing in such cases. The services of a professional cost a lot, but Alana even sold old jewelry, once given by Kevin, to pay for the work of a lawyer. The lawyer had to work hard, but in the end Alana received the court's opinion on Emma's adoption. For her, it was like a mountain had fallen from her shoulders. Now she and Emma would be together, and the girl would not end up in an orphanage. Alana immediately went to the orphanage to take Emma home. The girl even cried from joy, hugging Alana and saying that she would never come back here again. At home, Alana prepared everything for the arrival of the little girl: a new bed with linens, a closet with beautiful dresses, a desk. She fulfilled all the requirements of the guardianship authorities, creating a cozy and comfortable corner for Emma. And it gave Alana great joy to take care of the child, to choose toys and books for him. Alana's new life began. Emma turned out to be a wonderful child, perky, but able to keep herself in control, inquisitive and kind. She tried to take care of Alana, which moved the woman to tears. Alana had a family now, and she was happy. Emma finally went to kindergarten, where she immediately made many friends. The energetic, intelligent girl was always the center of attention. She invented games and activities that attracted children to her like a magnet. Alana couldn't get enough of her daughter. Emma didn't remember much about the past. It was as if she had decided to forget everything that had happened before she met Alana. And she had. Only sometimes she fidgeted restlessly in her sleep and soon calmed down. Probably all the same, in the subconscious remained some not too pleasant memories of life with her parents. But in the morning the girl could not say what she had dreamed. Alana was very careful to ask her about it, but she just shook her head. In due time, Emma went to school. And then it turned out that the girl has a great ability to do math. While others were solving simple examples, she, having coped with the obligatory part of the tasks, was studying Olympiad tasks for children a couple of grades older than herself. The teacher immediately recognized the talent of the little pupil and tried to develop it in every possible way. In middle school, Emma became interested in computer science and programming. Alana looked at her daughter and could not help but wonder how all these complex formulas and algorithms fit into the head of a 13-year-old. The woman herself was panicked by the sight of code, but Emma, with the keen look of a drummer, fingers on the keys, solved one complex problem after another. Emma became a prize winner of local and regional Olympiads more than once. Teachers believed that the girl had a great future. Alana was in solidarity with them. She was proud of her daughter and loved her very much. She was also worried about her daughter. Like any mother, this feeling was a bonus to the happiness of motherhood. There was no other way around it. Alana wondered how such a child could come from a family of marginalized people. These people abused booze, did not care about their daughter, did not engage in her development. The girl from an early age begged for alms in the underpass. Where did she get such abilities? It seemed strange to the woman. But there was no time to think about Emma's fate. Alana had to work even harder now. She wanted to dress Emma in beautiful, fashionable clothes, feed her daughter delicious and healthy food. She needed money for all that. So Alana did the best she could. It was hard to be alone, but the woman did not regret anything. On the contrary, she considered herself lucky. Fate had given her such a magnificent gift. It was an ordinary fall evening. Emma was already asleep with her hand under her cheek, just like when she was a child. Wow, how fast children grow up, Alana thought. 8 years had flown by. Emma had grown from a touching little girl into a beautiful young woman. Huge brown eyes, long shiny hair the color of melted chocolate. Slender, tall, dark-skinned. The admixture of Oriental blood gave the girl's appearance a special flavor. A beauty, and what a clever girl. Yes, nature had not been stingy, generously endowing Emma with everything at once. Alana smiled and returned to the laptop screen. The woman was trying to find the TV series she'd been told about at work. The search engine, as usual, produced a lot of unnecessary stuff. Alana was about to close the page, but then her eyes caught on a picture. The woman looked at it and could not believe her eyes. A teenage girl, slender, with long brown hair and a dazzling smile, posed in a bright pink swimsuit on the ocean. The wind ruffled the young beauty's hair. Behind her, the waves splashed and it was Emma. The same facial features, the same smile, even the proportions of her figure were the same. But how is that possible? Her girl had never been to the sea. There's the ocean, white sand, palm trees. The longer she looked at this girl, the more she was surprised. The teenager didn't just look like her daughter. This was Emma. I could even see the mole on her thigh. Emma had one just like it, she thought. Alana pulled away from the screen and took a few deep breaths. This couldn't be a coincidence. Gathering her wits, Alana clicked on the photo. It opened the social network of one Nikita Gortsev. Apparently the girl was his daughter. On the page of this stranger there were more photos. Some of them had Sonia, so the name of the young beauty, posing against the ocean. Alana wasn't good at Russian, but she could understand it from the captions on the pictures. The family lived in a large and beautiful house, traveling. Father, mother, and daughter Sonia were a happy family. Sonia, who looked uncannily like Emma, attracted attention with her exotic beauty. The mixture of blood had a spectacular result. Alana could not take her eyes off Sonia, because the girl was an exact copy of Emma. Sonia's father apparently worked in the field of technology, as evidenced by the photos on his page. Interestingly, Emma also had a knack for programming. Alana made up her mind. She sent Nikita a letter in English without translating it through translators, attaching a few photos of Emma. In the letter, she told her girl's story. It could have all been a coincidence, but something told Alana that such coincidences simply do not happen. Nikita replied right away. He thanked Alana and asked her to stay in touch. He wrote that he couldn't tell her everything yet, but he wanted to meet her and was even ready to come to America for that. He was going to do it as soon as possible. Alana answered him and turned off her computer. What had just happened? Why did she immediately, without thinking about the consequences, wrote Nikita this letter? What would happen now? Alana's heart clenched with icy anxiety. She wanted to rewind time and not send a stranger from the internet that letter. But Alana had always acted in her daughter's best interests, believing that every decision she made would only benefit Emma. And this time Alana did the same, guided by her concern for Emma's future. The adoptive mother tried to give her daughter everything she could, but there was often not enough money for participation in competitions and tournaments, for traveling and new impressions. The possibility that a wealthy programmer from Moscow, who seemed to have some connection with the fate of Emma, could take part in the girl's life seemed unlikely, but so necessary. In the morning, after a restless night, Alana told Emma everything. The girl stared in wonder at the open social media pages, taking in the unknown details that seemed strangely familiar. "I think I remember these places. Or rather, not like that. I don't remember, but I dream about something like this house sometimes." Unsure, of course. Maybe just something similar, Emma pondered. Her remark about everyone having a double added a mystical tinge to the story. When Nikita flew in, the tension reached a climax. His interest in the details of Emma's fate, his desire to know every detail of how Alana had found the girl, had filled the meeting in the cafe with a sense of foregone conclusion. Nikita was completely different from Emma, tall, trim, with blue eyes and blonde hair. His appearance was not associated with the dark-haired, brown-eyed girl. What had happened during this encounter? Could Nikita have shed light on the unusual resemblance between Sonia and Emma? Is there some deep, hitherto unknown connection behind it? The questions were many, and the answers were bound to follow. The world Alana and Emma were entering promised to be filled with new discoveries, and perhaps changes that would change their lives for the better once and for all. And yet the attentive Alana noticed the similarities, the dimple in Nikita's cheeks when he smiled, and his eyes. The man nodded in the exact same way. Even his nose seemed to wrinkle in the same way. It turned out that Nikita knew English. He had worked for a long time with English developers and had learned the language. Of course, the man confused words and cases and spoke with a strong accent, but Alana understood him perfectly. "This is just an incredible story," Nikita pronounced as they settled at a corner table. "I couldn't believe my eyes at first when I saw your daughter's picture. What a blessing that you wrote to me." Alana nodded. She wasn't sure she had done the right thing. It seemed to her that her life was taking another turn. Things were about to change abruptly again, and not for the better. She felt like she might lose Emma. The feeling was strong, and of course she already guessed that Emma was no stranger to this man. Nikita made a pleasant impression. He was handsome, polite, energetic, and very friendly. Alana almost physically felt the warmth emanating from him. There was nothing repulsive or suspicious about him to fear or antipathy. And then he told his story. Alana caught every word greedily. A lot of things fell into place now. The puzzle was coming together, but what to do next? Jonathan was a talented programmer. After high school, he moved to Moscow, where he first attended university and then got a job. He bought a house, married the beautiful Maria. His career was going uphill. The young, talented programmer was entrusted with complex projects, and one day he got into a team that cooperated with developers from America. They all worked together on a grandiose international project. In his personal life, Nikita also had everything going as well as possible. The young family was born at once 2 twin girls. Nikita and his wife Maria were happy, healthy, beautiful daughters, financial prosperity, love and mutual understanding between spouses. What more could one wish for? When little girls Sonia and Kira were 2 years old, Nikita was sent on a business trip to California. It was necessary to solve several work issues, a matter of a few hours a day. The man still had a lot of time left to get acquainted with this beautiful city. "So I made the huge mistake of asking Maria and the girls to come with me," he recalls. "That trip was supposed to be an exciting journey, but it turned out to be a real nightmare for our family. At first, everything was going just fine. Nikita would drive 2 or 3 hours to the office in the morning and then spend the entire day with his family walking around California. They visited the zoo and gallery together, walked around the center. True, having 2 young children meant more than just doting, joy and happiness. Both young parents were tired, which was probably what caused them to let their guard down. It happened in a huge, beautiful park with fountains, wide, flat paths and playgrounds. There were a lot of people in the park that sunny day, no surprise, since the weather was great and the weekend was ahead. Parents seemed to have decided to take their children out for a walk. Nikita was holding Sonia's hand and thought that his wife was also holding Kira's hand. But Maria and his daughter disappeared from his sight for a while. The sea of people had swept them in different directions. Kira had always been more curious and energetic than Sonia, always running somewhere, climbing. Maria was better at handling her. I thought Kira was dragging her wife off to find adventure again. It happened so often. I wasn't worried at all, Nikita continued. 5 or 6 minutes passed, no more. When Nikita finally saw Maria, she was standing at the monument, looking around for her family. Seeing Nikita, the woman smiled and rushed towards him. She was alone, without Kira. Nikita tensed, of course, but didn't panic yet because, well, little else, maybe Kira stayed on the swings or goes like a tail behind her mother's back and just can't be seen. "Where's Kira?" she asked anxiously, looking at her husband. And then Nikita realized everything and jumped up in horror. Maria thought that Kira was with him, and he thought that the daughter had stayed with his wife. The little girl was lost, and it had been about 7 minutes, if not more. How do we find her in this huge park with so many people? What to do? These questions instantly filled his head. Nikita immediately called the police. The call was responded to lightning fast, because it was about the disappearance of a small child. An outfit arrived at the park. At first, everyone hoped that the girl quickly found just lost, just wandering somewhere along the paths, admiring the surroundings, studying the world. It was quite in the character of Kira. But the little girl, as if in the water, rolled into the water. It soon became clear that something had happened to her. We had to return home after a month, Nikita continued. We left with nothing. We didn't know where our little girl was or what had happened to her. It was horrible. We can't even find words to describe our condition with Maria. We couldn't find a place to sleep. We couldn't sleep. We couldn't sleep. We didn't eat anything, and we blamed each other. He told how he was constantly in touch with law enforcement, even hiring private detectives. They worked on the case too, but not a single lead. As the years passed, there was little hope of finding Kira. Sonia grew from a little girl into a beautiful young woman. Looking at her, Maria and Nikita could only imagine what their Kira looked like now. Maria always felt that Kira was alive. Nikita shook her head. She didn't doubt it, and she was right, Alana pronounced. Emma is Kira. There could be no doubt about that. Then, years ago, the little girl was taken from the park. The girl was probably too young to pronounce her name correctly. And the people who took her decided her name was Emma, not Kira. Well, or they just called her their own name. Emma didn't remember anything. She was just a little girl, barely 2 years old. She gradually got used to the new mommy and daddy and learned the language. Their goal, apparently, was to make her not just a well-behaved child, but a full-fledged member of society. It was probably for this purpose that the girl was taken away. But then something went wrong. Emma's mother died, and the father, perhaps having found another way to earn money, realized that the girl no longer interested him. So he brought her to the train station, far from the city, where he left her mercilessly. Then Emma was found by Alana. All this time in Moscow, the girl's real parents found no place for themselves. They, of course, had to learn to live with this loss, but I know I could not. I didn't even want to imagine what Maria and Nikita had endured, to know nothing about the fate of their own child. Yeah, it would drive you crazy, Alana thought. Especially they may have been saved by the fact that they still had another daughter, Sonia. She was the one they were holding on to. And then I get this letter from you, Alana. And I see a picture of Emma. I'm sure your Emma is Kira. I haven't told my wife anything yet. I need to check it out first, do a DNA test to be sure. If there is a mistake, Maria is unlikely to stand for it. Nikita continued. There was no mistake, of course. The analysis confirmed Emma and Nikita's parentage. I honestly told everything to my daughter. The woman was naturally worried. Everyone realized that now that Emma's birth family had been found, Alana would be alone again. How am I supposed to live without my daughter now? How do I tear her from my heart? Alana agonized. But I have to do it. Emma is not my property. It is important that she lives with her blood relatives. With them, she will get more than I can offer. A brilliant future indeed awaits her with them. And so I watch as Emma begins to socialize with Nikita. You can immediately sense a kindred spirit in their interactions. Emma spoke to her father as if the years of separation had never happened. They laughed at the same jokes, discussed programming languages, argued over solving complex Olympiad problems, understood each other with half a word, even with half a look. I immediately realized that Emma was 100% Daddy's daughter. The woman wasn't jealous. No, she was happy for the girl. Emma's going to be really happy now. The paperwork took a while to finalize. Emma continued to live with Alana. Nikita preferred to stay in a hotel so as not to embarrass the hostess. They saw each other every day, walked, talked, discussed the future. Emma is leaving with her father. It was already a settled matter. The girl looked forward to seeing her mother and especially her sister Sonia. She was a little worried, but she lived the days before departure in joyful anticipation. After all, the girl would soon have a whole new life. But it was hard for Emma to part with Alana, the man who had raised her. "How will I be without you?" the girl sighed in the evenings. "I don't know what's happening to me. I seem to want to leave as soon as possible, to see how things work there, to meet my mother and sister. But I won't be happy without you." "We'll get used to it," Alana smiled. "And then, we'll see each other. I'll fly to visit you and you'll visit me here sometimes. Oh, and Skype's still on too." "It's not like that, you realize that." Of course, Alana understood. She tried her best not to show Emma her sadness. Alana was used to having such a sweet little girl in her life. She had raised her, considered her a daughter, but that didn't give her the right to make Emma her property. Alana had made the decision that was most favorable to Emma, and now she had no doubt that she'd done the right thing. And then Emma and Nikita flew away. A cold emptiness appeared in Alana's soul at the same moment. Yes, once again a woman was starting a new life, and it would take some getting used to. Emma wrote and called often. She quickly learned the language and made friends. In fact, Alana had no doubt that she would. Emma talked about how much fun she was having in the new place, but she always ended the conversation by saying how much she missed Alana. If only she knew how much Alana missed her. A few months passed and New Year's Eve came. This time Alana decided not to decorate the tree. She always did it for Emma. Why would she do it now? Alana was spending the holiday alone. She'd been invited to a party, but she declined. She wasn't in the mood right now. She wanted peace, quiet, comfort. She wanted to sit quietly, watch the New Year's program on TV and think about her own thoughts. Just at that moment, there was a signal that someone wanted to chat with Alana on Skype. The woman smiled. It was Emma, of course. There was no one else. Indeed, a smiling, sweet face appeared on the screen. Emma's eyes were shining, as always. Sonia loomed over her shoulder. Alana still couldn't get used to the fact that the sisters looked so much alike. They had become inseparable since their reunion. Emma wished Alana a happy new year, wished her happiness and good luck, told her again that she missed her, and then said that Nikita wanted to talk to her. Alana wasn't surprised. She often talked to both him and Maria. They told her about how things were going with Emma and constantly thanked her for saving their baby girl. Nikita probably wants to wish her a happy new year. There's nothing special about it. But from Nikita's face, Alana somehow immediately guessed that her life was kind of ready to take another sharp turn. The man looked too serious and determined. The woman's stomach even churned with an incomprehensible premonition. Nikita actually wished her a happy new year. And then, "Kira misses you very much." "Very much," he said, looking into Alana's eyes. "She has everything to be happy, but she's still not completely happy. She misses you," Nikita began. "Maria and I thought it would pass. We could just call each other, visit each other. But you two seem to have formed a strong bond. Kira, it literally splits in two. One part is reaching across the ocean to you, and the other part wants to stay with us. The children's doctor said it's very dangerous to her health." So then Nikita made Alana an offer she just couldn't refuse. It turns out that not far from them sold a few years ago a small house with a plot of land. And Nikita bought it, counting on the fact that Sonia, having lost one of their daughters, will stay to live with them, even after becoming an adult. So we bought this house, where, according to our plan, adult Sonia was to live with her husband and children. But Sonia and Kira are still just kids. Besides, they both already said they're not going to live in our neighborhood. They both have grandiose plans to conquer the world. and our cozy neighborhood is too crowded for them, you see. Anyway, the house was idle. We're asking you to move in. Nikita finished. Alana looked at Nikita in silence. She didn't even know what to say. His words were too good to be true. Is she really going to live next to Emma? Yes, she'll have to get used to everything new, learn the language. But that doesn't matter. If Alana gets a chance to talk to her girl every day. There are jobs for you here. A lot of families need a nanny. You have experience. Besides, there are a lot of restaurants here that are always in need of kitchen helpers. Kira said you're the one for the job. Nikita continued. So are you going to take it? There's nothing keeping you in your town, and this way you'll be close to Kira. The girl is very attracted to you. She needs you, and we need you. Maria and I also want to do something good for the man who saved our daughter. We're one family. Now the house sits idle for nothing anyway. You'll take care of it too, so you'll help us a lot. So what do you think of my offer? Nikita looked at Alana hopefully and waited for an answer. She probably should have said that she needed to think about it, to weigh the pros and cons. But why? After all, the decision had already taken shape in her head. This was just great news. Of course I agree, Alana said without a shadow of a doubt. Her answer was full of determination and joy. The prospect of living near Emma and becoming even closer to the family that had welcomed her so warmly seemed like a marvelous opportunity. It wasn't just an offer to move in, it was a chance to start a new life where she would not only take care of the house, but also help with Emma's upbringing, support her, and be there to experience all the important moments of her life. Nikita smiled back, feeling relieved and happy about her decision. That's wonderful, Alana. We're so excited to have you become a part of our life here on a permanent basis. Kira will be thrilled. It was a new beginning for Alana, full of promise and opportunity. A new page in her life was opening before her, filled with family warmth, new challenges, and most importantly, the happiness of being close to those she loves.